welcome to another FDA program by MassMEDIC. I am Rachel Robinson, Vice President at MassMEDIC, and we're absolutely thrilled to have you joining us for this program. So before we get started, I wouldn't be able to do this without at least telling you a little bit about our sponsors. So I want to say a big thank you to Veeva MedTech, RQM+, Duane Morris, and ML Strategies, who have been our series sponsors for the two programs that we've run this year on our FDA update. And it's been an incredible series, and it's only going to get better today. So I'm really thrilled to have you all joining us for this, and a big shout out to them. You're going to hear from a lot of them today with a ton of outstanding content. So thank you all for supporting us in this, and thank you all for joining us in this program. I did want to make you really quickly aware of two more programs we do have coming up. One is our last virtual program to round out the year. It is our last Women in MedTech program, and it'll be on December 14th at 10 a.m. We're thrilled to be joined by the CTO and co-founder of Vaxxus Technologies, who's going to share with us a little bit about their journey. They're a really cool startup, growing rapidly and expanding here in Massachusetts, and a company that we're really proud to have as a member. So you won't want to miss Catherine Kosuda and what she has to say about her journey in MedTech. The other program I want to make you aware of is this program, actually. So we will be running our FDA focused series next year in 2022. The plan is to run at least our first program virtually, which makes a lot of sense, I think, with what's going on in the world still. But we are thrilled to have Dr. Jeff Shuren joining us yet again on February 1st at 9 a.m. So I will tell you to mark that date on your calendar. He'll be talking to us about priorities for 2022. And there will be a host of outstanding content in that program as well. But I want to make sure that you all are aware of that. So I think this is probably a really great time to turn things over to our first set of speakers. Annie Saha is the Assistant Director of the Center of Excellence for Digital Health over at FDA, and we are absolutely thrilled to have her sharing with us this morning about some of the initiatives of the Center of Excellence, how folks can interact, and what the real priorities are. As always, we encourage you to pop Q&A into the bottom section. We won't have probably a ton of time for Q&A in this first session, but there will be a chance to kind of answer questions as we go. So as the program runs through, Q&A option at the bottom is the best option. And when speakers are done, they may have a chance to pop in answers if they can't get to the questions live. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Annie.
Great, thank you, Rachel, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak. And let me get my slides going. Right. Well, I'm pleased to be here today, and I'm excited to talk a little bit about some of the efforts we have at Digital Health and what we've been doing at the Digital Health Center of Excellence. As Rachel noted, I'm Assistant Director for the Center of Excellence, and I focus on our strategic partnerships, regulatory science, strategic planning, operations for the Center of Excellence out of CDRH. So as I'm sure you've seen this, especially if you've seen any of Jeff or others talk, but ultimately at CDRH, patients are of course at the heart of what we do, and we want to ensure that patients in the U.S. have access to high quality, safe and effective medical devices of public health importance first in the world, and that of course includes digital health technologies. And when we're thinking about digital health, we're really thinking about that convergence of technology and healthcare and how we can really move healthcare from the clinic to the patient. We've really seen, of course, in COVID, that acceleration to telehealth and other types of remote monitoring. And digital health also allows us to really understand physiology and behavior of people in the real world, and not just in a clinical setting in a hospital room. And it also allows us to really leverage the power of computing, sensors, connectivity, and software. And digital health is really part of a patient or a person's everyday lifestyle, and that patient-generated health data that's collected from digital health technologies really allows us to understand how people are really behaving in their day-to-day life. And you can really learn all kinds of information, as you can kind of see in this pictorial of everything from a smart ring to glasses, all across the board as digital health technologies continue to evolve over time. Now, when we think about digital health technologies, of course, as an FDA talk, I feel like I have to give you a definition. And so we define digital health through the FDA NIH Best Glossary as a system that uses computing platforms, connectivity, software, and sensors for healthcare and related uses. And digital health technologies can really be used as a medical product. It can be incorporated in a product, used to develop medical products, used to study medical products, or used as a companion or adjunct to a medical product, including diagnostics and therapeutics. So there's really so many use cases for digital health technologies. And just a little bit about the Center of Excellence itself. So we launched the Center of Excellence in September 2020 to really empower all stakeholders to advance healthcare by fostering responsible and high-quality digital health innovation. So our aims with the Center of Excellence are really to connect and build partnerships, share knowledge to be able to increase awareness and understanding, drive synergy and best practices, and also ultimately work to innovate our regulatory approaches to provide efficient and least burdensome oversight. So our goals and objectives for the Center of Excellence are to foster that collaboration and coordination both within FDA and beyond FDA by forging and fortifying new strategic partnerships, working with other FDA centers and offices to align and integrate in digital health, to promote awareness and transparency and consistent application of digital health policies within and beyond FDA, and to really pioneer the development and enhancement of digital health paradigms that uphold our standards of safety and effectiveness. In terms of what we do, we sort of divided it into three areas. One is how do we externally provide services and support, and that's really providing clarity, advancing international harmonization, facilitating and building strategic partnerships, and communicating our interests in advancing standards activities. Within FDA, we're looking to provide digital health expertise across the agency, offer training opportunities, disseminate shared resources, foster collaboration in areas of common interest, facilitate synergies in regulatory science research. And then, of course, within CDRH and in device focus, it's really to set and lead our strategic direction in digital health, establish and promote best practices, and enable a transparency and predictable product review, as well as building our capacity to oversee and leverage digital health technologies, and ultimately how we can coordinate the development of cross-cutting digital health policies. Now, in terms of how we operationally set up the Center of Excellence, we have quite a bit in terms of coordinating operations. So we set up a digital health advisory board that includes senior leaders across all of the FDA centers to help advise the Digital Health Center of Excellence and identify and drive coordination in areas that are of common interest. And with that advisory board, we've already launched and set up 2 subcommittees that are charged to coordinate areas in digital health topic areas that affect all of FDA. And so those areas are artificial intelligence and machine learning and digital health technologies. As I mentioned, we're working on training and education and forums to bring speakers and thought leaders to FDA. Within CDRH, we have a digital health steering committee that was established actually in 2015 to help with consistently applying our policies related to submissions that we receive that have digital health technologies, and it also helps us identify any policy development needs. We also have a program directors forum within CDRH for areas that aren't specifically within the division of digital health that have a digital health components that are part of the broader Center of Excellence, like advanced manufacturing, patient science, and cybersecurity. So our areas of focus for the Center of Excellence are pretty broad, and some are sort of specifically, as I mentioned, housed within the division of digital health at CDRH, and then coordinated sort of more virtually across the center and agency. So focuses software as a medical device and in a medical device, AI/ML, wearables, wireless connectivity, 5G, interoperability, cybersecurity, virtual reality, real-world evidence, real-world performance, advanced manufacturing, and patient-generated health data. And of course, more broadly, I'm sure you all have seen some more efforts in terms of what we're trying to do in terms of foster a digital health ecosystem is really to try to tailor our regulatory framework so that we can enhance patient access to high quality digital products, enable manufacturers to rapidly improve software products with minor changes while continuing to maintain a reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness and continuing to be minimally and least burdensome. And so part of that, of course, has been putting out guidance documents, and we've published 12 since 2018, both in draft and final guidances to help provide that ongoing regulatory clarity. And with that, we've seen a variety of technologies that we have authorized in some way at FDA. So we've empowered the health of millions of individuals in terms of heart health and have cleared or approved Apple, Samsung, Fitbit, and AliveCor, all for their over-the-counter ECG apps. We've run the marketing of the first digital therapeutic for children with ADHD. Quite a lot of work in terms of digital therapeutics, and we see a lot certainly coming down the pike in terms of apps related to insomnia, substance use disorder, opiate use disorder, and diabetes management. And then lots of work, obviously, in the artificial intelligence and machine learning space, including a device that detects diabetic retinopathy in patients with diabetes who may not have been previously diagnosed, and using machine learning to help support that diagnosis. So some highlights of the work that we've done in the Center of Excellence is, again, the ongoing clarity with the documents, with the guidance documents. We have over 80 experts in our network of digital health experts. We've addressed over 2,000 inquiries since 2018, and generally it takes us less than 70 days to make a decision on a 510K that has digital health content. And we've done quite a bit of work internationally with IMDRF and other activities, including the functional vocabulary on software as a medical device, risk frameworks, quality management, and SAMD clinical evaluation. We've been working through the pre-cert pilot program, which is really looking at how to move from an episodic to a continuous oversight while enabling trust in organizations. And then really we've done quite a bit of work in the AI/ML space with a discussion paper, launching and being members of collaborative communities, public workshops, and a patient engagement advisory committee meeting. We published the AI/ML action plan, as well as a list on currently marketed AI/ML devices, had a workshop, and published a good machine learning practices document with the UK and Canada, which I'll speak to a little bit more. As far as AI/ML, we've sort of proposed, what does that TPLC approach look like when you're talking about an AI/ML workflow? And in 2019, we published a discussion paper on a proposed regulatory framework for AI/ML related devices. And following up with that, in January of this year, we published an action plan for AI/ML based software as a medical device, where we outlined 5 steps to really advance access for these new technologies, which is 1, to update a proposed AI/ML regulatory framework, strengthen our role in harmonizing good machine learning practices, foster a patient-centered approach, support development of regulatory science methods, and advance real-world performance pilots. So transparency is really fundamental to that patient-centered approach, and transparency really supports the safe and effective use of AI/ML devices because it allows patients, providers, and caregivers to make informed decisions, help support the proper use of device, can help promote health equity, facilitate evaluation and monitoring of device performance, and foster and promote adoption. And as I noted, we did publish 10 principles on good machine learning practices with our colleagues at Health Canada and at the UK's MHRA. And we really see these guiding principles as adopting from other sectors that we've seen in terms of been proven, but then also tailoring those so they can be applicable to medical technology in the healthcare sector, as well as creating new practices that might be specific for medical technology in the healthcare sector. And these principles are really meant to sort of just show what's important when thinking about AI/ML devices, and then ultimately where there might need to be collaborative work, whether through regulatory harmonization or regulatory science or other types of collaborations, and looking at things like ensuring that you've got a multidisciplinary expertise, that your clinical study participants' data sets are representative of the intended population, that those data sets are based on best available methods, and that you're really looking at and thinking about how to focus on the human and AI team, that users, again, are provided that clear information so that we're being transparent, that you're following good software engineering and security practices. Training data sets are independent of the test data sets, that the models are really designed to tailor the available data, that testing demonstrates the device performance in clinically relevant conditions, and that those models are really being monitored and performed, and there are any retraining risks if the algorithm is adapting over time. We've also put out resources on AI/ML medical devices and what we currently have seen is marketed in the United States. And this is really just an initial list to be a public resources for what these devices are and FDA's work in the area. It really shows that AI/ML is being used across medical disciplines. And this isn't an exhaustive list, and it's based on what's publicly available related to the devices. And we will keep it updated every so often as we move forward. Another area where we are doing a lot of work in is in digital health technologies, and recognizing they can be used in a variety of ways when evaluating medical products, whether you're talking about for remote data collection, whether real performance, clinical investigations and enrichment, electronic informed consent. And digital health technologies can offer many benefits when used in an investigation. It can help with decentralizing clinical trials, improving patient recruitment and retention. It allows for more continuous and more frequent data collection compared to current methods, as well as that longitudinal monitoring over time, and also allowing for not necessarily having to have people come into a study site in order to do that long-term follow-up and monitoring. There's the potential for improving study accessibility for participants. Also allows us for the capture of real-world data and patient-generated health data. It can allow for transmitting data directly from participants to study staff, as well as the potential for informing novel endpoints. And when we're talking about patient-generated health data, we're really talking about how can we harness that information as real-world evidence. And really, it's going to help us really understand patients' lifestyles and behaviors, can help fill those gaps that we sometimes have now in terms of traditional clinical trial data, can help us better understand safety and clinical benefit, and potentially enable interventions earlier that can lead to improved outcomes, and really moving more towards that prevention rather than intervention. Other efforts that we are engaged in and in partnering in are, of course, a lot of work happening in the interoperability space, and specifically in the diagnostic testing of looking at how do we harmonize interoperability through the effort that what we call SHIELD, which is systematic harmonization and interoperability enhancement for laboratory data. And this is a public-private partnership where we're looking at improving interoperability utility of in vitro diagnostic test data, and how do we harmonize those semantic data standards appropriately and qualified by sort of a sole authoritative source. Ultimately, how do we describe the same test in the same way? And of course, this has gotten additional importance as we've seen now with the COVID-19 pandemic. And we do a lot of this work in collaboration. So this is done through various efforts. We collaborate with our Centers for Excellence in Regulatory Science and Innovation. We have been members of different public-private partnerships like Medical Device Innovation Consortium. We are engaged as members in multiple different collaborative communities, which are forums where the public and private can really work together to solve challenges and achieve common objectives and outcomes. And we are engaged in multiple that are related to artificial intelligence, machine learning, health equity, digital health measurements, as well as real-world evidence. So one question we have is, how can you collaborate with us at the Digital Health Center of Excellence? So we have multiple different venues. As I noted, we do collaborate in terms of regulatory science research with our CERC colleagues. We are members of different collaborative communities. We have our network of digital health experts, which is the pool of vetted experts who can share knowledge and experience on digital health issues with us, our staff, on an as-needed basis. And then we have our digital health inbox. And as I mentioned, we continue to respond to inquiries, and we try to generally respond within 14 days or less. And that's really to help navigate our current policies and provide any additional information or feedback. And that mailbox is digitalhealth@fda.hhs.gov. So with that, thank you, and look forward to the Q&A with Kevin.
Awesome, thanks, Annie. I would love now to introduce Kevin Liang, the VP of Clinical Strategy for Veeva, who is going to do some structured Q&A with Annie. So I will turn things over to you, Kevin.
Great, thank you, Rachel, and thanks, Annie. That was a great presentation. So we do have a Q&A box in the Zoom chat. So if you want to ask some questions, we will see if we have time to get to those. Certainly, if not during the session, there can be follow-up to some of these questions that come in. So thanks for participating. So Annie, tons of information that you covered, and would love to kind of dig into a few areas which I think are relevant to the audience, digital health industry, and really as a whole, because as we think about it, digital health covers the gamut of diagnostics to wearables, digital therapeutics. It really, I think all conditions can be covered in some way or the other by digital health. So when companies are coming to you initially and you're partnering with industry, maybe you can just help us understand what are some of the most common questions that are coming in from your industry partners. What are they asking? Where are the gaps in the knowledge for these initial conversations for you guys?
I think the biggest question we get a lot is it a medical device or not? And is it regulated by FDA? So that's probably the overarching largest question. And of course, how does the device sort of then fit in terms of the risk, the risk categorization and where sort of it falls from a regulatory pathway perspective. So that's probably the biggest question we get. And that's really where a lot of the guidances that we've put out have really been trying to help clarify that based on, of course, the statutory definitions that came out in 21st Century Cures, as well as, the additional guidances we put out in terms of, what's under enforcement discretion, what is considered a medical device. And then another question we get, especially from not necessarily the medical device sector, but pharma and others, is if they want to use digital health technology in clinical investigation, is that considered a medical device or not? And what does that pathway look like? So those are probably the biggest types of questions we get is, what is it a medical device, and where does it fit in sort of the pathways, in our different pathways?
Yeah, so I think related to that then, as products are classified as a medical device, do you find them being challenged and fitting to the traditional pathways of a PMA, a 510K, or de novo? Are there additional challenges in trying to figure out, what types of classifications really meet these types of products that are coming in?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly why we launched the pre-cert pilot program, was to really look at understanding that digital health technologies are changing and evolving rapidly. How do we keep pace with that? Our current regulatory framework was from 1976, so no one was thinking about these types of technologies then. I think a computer was probably about as big as like a entire office building. So our framework is a little bit difficult to navigate with digital health technologies, and how do we keep pace in a way that's going to be responsible while ensuring safety and effectiveness, but not also being burdensome both for FDA as well, but for companies as well, because it's, otherwise we're going to all keep seeing additional applications on and on and on. And, our ability to keep pace with that is going to be a challenge. So we really do see, and what we've seen with the pre-cert pilot program, is that we probably do need additional authorities in order to be able to really fully realize the potential for digital health technologies.
Yeah, I think speed is certainly important. So as you think about, the pace of new innovation coming, there's also the pace of existing innovation growing. So when you think about technology, software, there are enhancements that are made very regularly. So the products are getting better and changing. How should companies think about, how do they keep within compliance, in a regulated world with their innovations really improving as quickly as they do? Is there kind of good thought practices on how to kind of balance those two things?
That's exactly what we're trying to figure out, and that's an area we definitely want feedback in, is how do we balance that and think about and in some cases actually updates are to the benefit of patients, like we were talking about a security patch or something like that. You're actually improving the safety of a device, and so it's really important to ensure that we have that ability to for companies and for patients to have access to the most up-to-date software. And so how do we do that? And also from the FDA side, ensure that the device is still safe and effective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, as you go into questions around safety and effectiveness, this is probably an area that drives a lot of confusion, in the space, because you have measures of effectiveness, which I think, are clear and measurable and discrete. But when you think about safety, and you think about safety in some of these devices, is there a lot of questions around how do you really gauge safety with some of the digital health technologies, perhaps even specifically digital therapeutics? It's some of them are presumed safe, just because they're apps, they're things that are delivered via a computer. But how do you think about safety when it comes to these types of products?
Yeah, I think obviously it's an important question. It's different with some digital health devices, like app-based devices, versus a traditional medical device. And so, of course, one area that we're very involved in and focused in is thinking about standards, because a lot of standards can help with thinking about and understanding sort of the safety of devices. Verification and validation, of course, is going to be really important for digital health technologies, and thinking about that. And then an important aspect, too, that we are continuing to think about and certainly recognize is important, is also ensuring that digital health technologies, we're not creating additional digital health divide in terms of patient access, and thinking about sort of the health equity perspective of devices. So safe and effective, but then also sort of equitable access, and ensuring that people are really thinking about that up front in terms of the development of the device. Because you could have the best app in the world, but if people don't have broadband or unlimited data plans, people might not be able to use them. And so how do we also think about some of those aspects as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And then, when you think about the most common path of getting to market, like a 510K, and you think about the traditional methods of substantial equivalence, and some of these technologies are so novel, so different, and they think about trying to take a 510K pathway and not having a perfect predicate device to kind of match to, and trying to take that path. Are you seeing that that's being a challenge for industry and companies? Is the de novo pathway really becoming the go-to more often than not? What are you seeing in that regard?
Well, I think we've certainly obviously seen and granted quite a few de novos in the digital health space, I think partially for that reason. That is, of course, also where some of our broader policies from CRH come into play, in terms of STEP program guidance and other aspects, in terms of not necessarily having a predicate, but really looking at safety and performance, looking at standards and some of those as our ways to be able to ensure and look at safety and effectiveness, because there may not always be a predicate or an appropriate predicate in a lot of cases. So that again also is kind of where we are in our framework from 1976. So as we work with Congress and others, hopefully we can have some additional authorities that will help us with some of these aspects.
Mm-hmm. So we'd love to spend some time talking about data. So with these technologies, the amount of data that's collected, that's available, it's not only significant, but it's very different. So we think about monitoring devices where you're collecting, continuous 24/7 data, and these other types of, like, let's say AI-based image analysis, where you're getting, very discrete and differential measures of things. how should the industry think about this data? I mean, it's just overwhelming, and you really want to figure out, what data do you need? How do you best utilize it? What does the agency want to see? It's one of these areas where it's not a lack of data; it's clarity on what to do with that data. What do you think
Yeah,
is the best way to approach that?
I think the struggle is real for all of us there, in terms of what do we do with that? When is that data? How do we use that information in a way that's actually actionable in some way, whether you're talking about us from an FDA regulatory perspective, whether you're talking about as a clinician or a patient, like, if you're getting 2 weeks worth of your EKG data, you just have that reams of information. What do you do with that, whether you're a patient or a provider, or us as FDA or as a company really need to understand and think about, how do we assess that information in a way and use it so that it's actionable? Because to your point, Kevin, there's lots of data that's coming from these devices, but what do we actually do with it? And I think that's an area we don't have the answers for yet, but an area that we obviously recognize is very important, and where probably collaborations and partnerships, because I don't think any one entity has the solution for, what does that mean or look like? And that's also where, thinking about that transparency aspect that I talked about, like specifically, I spoke about it for AI/ML, but more broadly for software as a medical device. But how do we explain also what is that technology, and how are you transparent about what it is, and how can we sort of, not just from a labeling perspective, but in just a way of communicating what the device is, what does it do, the performance, what, especially in an AI/ML context, what is, what data sets were on it. One thing we heard from our patient engagement advisory committee meeting and from the AI transparency workshop we had last month is really understanding, was that device tested and trained in people like me? Does it work in different patient populations? And so I think those are all things we need to sort of work together collectively on, of how do we use that data, and then how are we then communicating, what is the device and what is it doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, I think that you had mentioned this before, but, with digital health, in some cases being kind of a supplementary product, are you seeing, let's call them combination products coming in, where you have a traditional approved medical device with a digital health add-on, or maybe even a pharmaceutical paired with a digital health product? Are you seeing questions coming in around those types of applications, and how are you handling those?
Yeah, so we are definitely seeing a lot in terms of whether it's combination products or maybe something in the pharmaceutical space where they want to use the digital health technology, say, in a clinical investigation. There are also efforts, and we're collaborating with our colleagues in the Center for Drugs on Prescription, it's PDURS, and hopefully I'll get the acronym right, Prescription Drug Use Related Software, I believe is the acronym, and I may have slightly messed that up. But in terms of when software is being used for prescription drug and, helping in terms of patient understanding or some kind of communication about it. And so that's an area we work quite a bit with our colleagues in Center for Drugs on, and provide support for their activities. We work a lot with our Office of Combination Products related to digital health devices, and when there might be a digital health component in some kind of combination product. And so that's really where, as a Center of Excellence, we're trying to sort of provide those services both within CDRH, but then across the agency. We have been working with CDER as well on a guidance on using digital health technologies for remote data collection and clinical investigations as well. So there's a lot of cross-center work as well as just within CDRH because of the cross-cutting nature of digital health products.
Yeah. Well, you guys have, well, you certainly accomplished a lot since the launch of the center. So some of the highlights that you mentioned, and great visibility to forward-looking plans all the way up to 2025. What are kind of some of the key near-term priorities for the center that the audience might want to know about? So what are you guys really focused on here over the next year? Like, what are some of the key things that are going to be really evolving from your group?
Yeah, I think obviously continuing to build in the AI/ML space with our efforts under the AI/ML action plan, certainly especially focused on how do we address bias and reduce bias in AI/ML devices, but more broadly in terms of digital health products and how we can advance health equity in the space. So that's going to be, a big area that we're going to continue to push and focus in on, and building also on our efforts specifically in the transparency space with the workshop that we had, and how we can continue to build that work so that we can ensure that people know what these technologies are and how do we best communicate that. And I think that's, a broader challenge in terms of health literacy and communication, but we really specifically want to focus on what does transparency look like, especially for AI/ML devices. Certainly in the digital health sort of technology realm, there's a lot of interest, and with the COVID pandemic, we've really seen that interest and continued use in terms of remote monitoring, and how can we leverage digital health technologies for that in terms of both in clinical investigations, but more broadly in terms of real world performance and ultimately understanding how people are performing. And so those efforts are going to continue and build over time. And that, of course, then gets to your previous comment and question about, what do we do with that data? And so I think that's a big area that we want to focus and collaborate on, is how do we really think about this information? How do we use it in a way that's actionable and meaningful? And then, of course, we have our continued efforts like the A and B list that CDRH put out earlier this maybe about a month or so ago. There's quite a few digital health guidances that are on that list. Of course, we're going to continue to be working on those and hopefully getting them out as quickly as we can. And we have a lot of work as well on the international front, so continuing our efforts with IMDRF. The AI/ML glossary was just put out, and I believe the public comment period just ended on that. But continuing those efforts, we had our effort with Health Canada and MHRA on good machine learning practices, but we're continuing to build a lot of those international harmonization activities as well, and I see that as a big piece of what's coming as well.
That's terrific. It's a lot of work to pull that together, but also really a lot of collaboration.
We are hiring, so if anyone's someone who's interested, because there's a lot of work to do.
All right, well, the audience heard it here. The FDA is hiring to really help grow the center, and I think with that, actually, there was a great question that came in, which is so will the CDRH, are they going to add any more companies to the pre-cert program? Is that something that's in these near-term goals?
So actually, with the pre-cert pilot, we are actually going to be planning to put out a final report on what we've learned through the pilot program. So we will not be adding additional companies, but we'll be putting out a report on kind of what we've learned through the pilot program, and then use that information to help sort of show what we've learned, what gaps there still are, and sort of some of the challenges, including where we might need additional authorities to really fully implement a program. But I think ultimately we've kind of learned what we can and what we can do in our current regulatory framework through the pre-cert pilot.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then just kind of thinking about it, with the program being relatively new, what's the best way for companies to engage with your office and kind of address their issues? And also, do you become kind of a consistent partner with these companies throughout their entire journey, through the regulatory process? What's the best way for the audience to think about that?
Yeah, well, one is if you have specific questions, the mailbox is a great tool. We have a whole team of folks from the Digital Health Center of Excellence team who sort of track the mailbox, and we keep track of it and try to ensure that we are being responsive and that we can respond as quickly as possible for any, more specific kind of digital health policy questions. And we certainly are welcome to, or as you're submitting, a pre-sub or something to an OHT, that if you want to include or have some digital health perspective, feel free to ask for, including the Digital Health Center of Excellence as part of, your pre-sub meetings are full on. And we are here to help support the OHTs and companies in terms of, developing the best evidence so that your product can come to market.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess in summary, we are flexible and open to being supportive in also ensuring that we're sort of all following similar policies and procedures.
Yeah. So you had mentioned earlier about access to these technologies being a very important consideration. So kind of fair, equitable access. What are some of your thoughts around that particular area? So what are some things that industry can think about when it comes to developing products where you can really achieve that level of access so that there's not, populations and groups of people who really can't get, these types of technologies to really support their health?
Yeah, I think it's really upfront, thinking about it at the very beginning when you're doing the device design and ideation phase, really thinking about, what populations is this device going to be for, and are you thinking about all the different types of kind of use cases for that? And we do have some efforts where we're part of collaborative communities, both the MedTech Color as well as the data collaborative community, where the idea of ensuring sort of diverse populations are part of clinical investigations, as well as, what does digital inclusion really look like and what does that mean? And so the efforts with the data collaborative community specifically are looking at, what does digital measurement and digital inclusion really look like, and how do you think about it across sort of the whole life cycle? And so I think, we're continuing to collaborate in terms of thinking about, what are those tools that we can provide as well, so that way we're not just talking about it, but are there actually actionable or other tools that can actually benefit companies to help as they're thinking about it? So if you're thinking about ensuring that, patients who maybe have disability or other access challenges are, included in device development as part of, and also as part of the patient populations, and also, thinking about that access, in terms of do people have connectivity and all of those aspects that really are thought about up front so that you're not trying to fix it on the back end.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did want to do a quick time check, Rachel. How are we doing on time? We do have some questions that have come in, so maybe we can get to those if we have a couple minutes. But
I think you've got just a few minutes. I think we can answer one or two more, and then probably have to wrap up. But I think you've got just a few minutes.
Okay, so let me go here, and sorry if I missed your question. I'm calling it out here, but we'll try to get to it in a follow-up. So one question is there any target of issuance for the pre-cert pilot program lessons learned report? So when can we expect to see that?
We hope for sometime in early next year.
Okay. And then there is a question here about, do you have any information to share at this point about the status of FDA's work on aligning the QSR with ISO 13485 management? Is that something that you can comment on at this point?
That is a continuous effort, and certainly our team on the international program led by Melissa Torres is actively working on that. I don't have anything more specific in terms of status there.
Okay, terrific. All right, so I think we will save the other questions for follow-up, so we can close up on time here. So Annie, thank you so much. Great presentation. Thank you for joining and spending the time today. And Rachel, I'll pass it back to you.
That's great. Thank you. And thank you both, Kevin and Annie. That was a really wonderful presentation. And thank you for all the questions that came in. I think there were a lot of things that people would love to ask that aren't quite in Annie's wheelhouse. So we'll try to get you answers on, and I've sent a couple of you notes on clarifications. So if you'd like to resubmit your questions, I can try to get you some answers at a later time. But I think one of the questions that a lot of the questions that have come in are really about data, right? So it's really an understanding of what is a medical device and when, and how to really kind of understand that. Annie, I think the things that you shared in your slides earlier were really great, right? Kind of understanding how the agency views a medical device. But I think, one of the things we've been finding with a lot of member companies and even just in industry is the question mark of when do you ask that question? Is it, do you push forward and just assume a yes or a no, or is it better to ask? So, and if you still have a minute, I might ask you, I would imagine the question, it should just be a question that's asked, right? You have an email inbox, you have, listings on the website. People should not be afraid to ask this question.
Exactly. We're not scary, at FDA. We're people too, and we're friendly, I think. So yes, reach out, use the mailbox. That's exactly what we have it for, is to really be able to provide some of those answers and help folks really think about it up front. Because it also would be a shame in a lot of ways if people are trying to stay in a general wellness or in a non-FDA regulated space because they don't want to come to FDA, but that could also limit and hinder then the utility of a product, and ultimately isn't good for people and patients
Yeah, and I think one of the things we talked about in the pre-call as well was, the Center of Excellence is not changing the way submissions work, right? The goal is not to reconfigure the entire process and give you all the purview over what is approved and what's not approved. It seems like the best way companies can really utilize what you're doing is to interact with you and to ask questions, because I would imagine that's how you then go understand what guidance to draft.
Exactly. The more we hear from the public, the better it helps us in terms of where, what are the big questions and challenges, what are the pain points, and that can help us address it, whether it's through policy or guidance, whether it's through collaborations in some way.
Yeah. I think just to echo what you said earlier as well, one of the things we've heard a lot from our digital health working group internally at MassMEDIC is that the give and take, the pros and cons of medical device versus non-medical device, right? And we've heard from a number of companies who said, you know what, we weren't sure if we needed to be a medical device, but we decided to go that route because we thought it added a lot more credibility and gave us a lot more opportunity on the marketing end of things. So, obviously we hear pretty regularly, and even more now so in industry, of products being put on hold, product being recalled, just because they didn't think they were, regulations changed and now they are. I would imagine it's a lot harder to go back and do it again to try to get the certifications and the approval rather than the first time around.
I think coming in early is the best. Talk to us early is the best way to go. So you're not, reinventing the wheel. We don't want people to have to keep doing. We don't want to see same studies happening over and over again. That's not of benefit to patients. It's not of benefit to companies. It's not really benefit to anyone.
Yeah. I guess the other question is a little bit more about what Kevin said about safety and efficacy, right? I think efficacy is easier to prove, or when you look at machine learning and AI, and this is kind of one of the questions that came in, what is the guidance around understanding safety and efficacy when it comes to software that's being put into a medical device? So the medical device is really, the product, but then there's software that enables that. There's vision tools, there's remote capabilities. Is there any specific guidance around that specifically for AI and ML?
So we, some of our policies and guidance certainly address it more broadly, and then we do have additional guidance that we are working on in terms of change control plans and, thinking about that, especially sort of over the long term for these AI ML devices, especially if a, algorithm is learning over time, what does that look like, and how do we sort of foster that innovation as while still continuing to ensure that it's still safe and effective.
Yeah, that's great. That's exactly what one of the questions was about change and understanding, right? As the product continues to change, how does that really affect approvals and what needs to be shown and approved? So thank you. That was very helpful. Okay, well, now I will let you go. I did have a couple extra questions. But Annie, Kevin, thank you both so very much for taking the time to put this presentation together, and Kevin for coming up with some really fantastic questions. I really do appreciate both of you being on the program.
Thanks so much, Rachel.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Awesome,
Thanks,
wonderful. Thank you. So we've got another couple of programs coming up right after this. So I want to give our next speakers a chance to kind of get ready. It will be a presentation by RQM Plus. So Lisa, you all are on deck. I'll give you a minute to kind of pull everything together. But thank you all again for kind of joining us for this and your wonderful questions. If there's any questions that we didn't get to in the Q&A, and I've asked you for clarification, please resubmit them. We absolutely want to get your questions answered. So if they weren't quite the right fit for Annie or Kevin, we'll try to find you the right people to get those answered. And I know it's very hard to, when things are very specific to product, to understand, okay, is this something that anyone's actually going to be able to answer, or is this something that you really should be emailing the Center of Excellence about? So we will try to get you directed to the right group. Okay, so with that, Lisa, I would say, is your team all set and ready to roll? Because I'll turn things over to you.
Yeah, if everybody just pops their faces up, I think we're good to go.
Wonderful.
Almost just missing one. Brian Pinder. We're actually running a few minutes early on the MassMEDIC schedule here, so he might have just walked away, but we'll be all right to do. Oh, there he is. Yay. Thanks, Brian. Okay. Okay, well, thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm Lisa Cassavant, founder and executive vice president at RQM Plus. In case you don't know us, RQM Plus is the leading international provider of regulatory quality and clinical consulting services for medical device and diagnostics manufacturers. We have 5 exceptional panelists today. I'll run through them really quickly. First is Allison Komiyama, founder and principal consultant from Acknowledge Regulatory Strategies and also former FDA CDRH reviewer. Next, Kevin Go, RQM Plus project engineer, also former FDA CDRH lead reviewer. Nancy Morrison, RQM Plus executive regulatory director. Brian Pinder, RQM Plus project engineer and former FDA CDRH lead reviewer, and Ryan Randall, RQM Plus senior engineer, and he is fresh out of FDA as a CDRH lead reviewer. So we'll get right to our questions. Our first question for today, talking about FDA in 2021, we'll start with Ryan, since he's the newest. We have the MDUFA data, but we would love to hear the inside perspective of what was it like in 2021 inside FDA? So what do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I think, as you said, I was at FDA for most of this year. I joined RQM Plus a few months ago. So I think, my experience this year at FDA, I think it honestly is kind of on a case-by-case basis, depending on, what office you were working with or what team you were on. But really FDA, despite COVID and everything going on with that, the number of submissions really is not going down. It's still, the number of submissions and workload that FDA is receiving is, still continuing. So I think, with that and with so many teams trying to, they have all this extra work dealing with the pandemic and everything that they're trying to respond to that with, there's been a lot of disruptions. Some teams, depending on what they work on, they might have to turn away Q submissions, maybe aren't able to do an RTA review, even 510Ks in many cases are being delayed. And so I would say, I think the main thing is that there's still the continued focus on device innovation and process improvements for a lot of the workflows at FDA. But there've been a lot of challenges, dealing with COVID and trying to handle the increased workload on top of, losing resources, and it's really hitting some teams harder than others. So it can be kind of a mixed bag, but yeah, I think that was kind of my experience this year.
What have others here experienced this year with FDA? Start with Nancy.
Yeah, so we've had a couple of unique experiences. One was a client that had to submit their pre-submission request 3 times before it was granted. And on the 3rd time, FDA said, we can do it, but we will only give you a written response. We won't meet with you. Now, we submitted that the 3rd time, they actually reviewed it, and then they called us and said, could we meet with you? We really need to talk about this one. So, I guess persistence pays off. In that case, we were able to have a conversation. So that was really good. The other thing I've seen is I think reviewers are pushed. We're seeing right up to the deadline. Like if it's due on this date, we're getting that response at 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night. We had one reviewer that reached out and said, would you mind submitting a submission issue request meeting? Because we need to stop the clock. We're not going to hit your target date. And if we have to give you a response before, then it's going to have to be NSC because we don't have time to finish our review. So of course we obliged, submitted the submission issue request, stopped the clock. We're able to get the 510K cleared with that extra time.
Wow.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Ryan and Nancy are saying. I think talking to some of our friends who are still at the agency, it definitely does sound like a case-by-case basis versus last year where it was all hands on deck and they would send out emails of saying, hey, we need more people from different divisions to help to pitch in and review these EUAs. It sounds like as the focus on EUAs is kind of subsiding, well, I'm not sure subsiding, but it's definitely more focused per those groups, that now it's more focused on for the divisions of addressing some of the backlog that we're seeing. And that's kind of what we're seeing in the MDUFA numbers as well, where FDA has a huge amount of submissions that are still pending at the end of this year.
Allison, what are you
chime
saying?
in. Yeah, I was going to say that's absolutely what we've seen as well. I think that FDA went, and I think Annie spoke to it. FDA kind of went on a hiring spree. They hired a lot of new folks in the past year, and we've noticed that not all of them are in DC anymore. A lot of them have never actually been on campus. They've never been to Maryland. We've had reviewers in Tennessee and Iowa. So it's very interesting to interact with new reviewers that have a lot of questions, and a lot of them are fantastic, and they're also trying to get training on the job from Zoom calls and from their WebEx. So we've had some challenges with that, just because I think one of the things that I loved when I was at FDA is you had what we called a chairside consult. If you didn't know the answer to a specific question, you either talked to your office mate or would walk down the hall and talk to somebody right then and there who knew the answer to your question, or maybe had experience with that specific topic. You can still do that. You can pick up the phone, but I have heard some reviewers say, well, it feels like I'm annoying, the person if I call them up, or I'm, interrupting them. They're at home, they're working from home. So I feel like there's not as much of that communication internally at FDA. I'll be excited to see if that comes back in the coming year, especially with some of the talks about FDA coming back into the office, maybe in January.
Yeah, I think we definitely talked about that in a lot of our device lives and podcasts about the importance of these chairside consults, because I feel like when you're with FDA, at least talking to them, since like when you're remote, you feel like to bother someone, you need to have like a big enough question. You can't just go ask them a little question, but sometimes those little questions are the ones that are important, that should be asked, because people have experience with like addressing those in other submissions or whatnot, right? So I think those little questions are being missed. I think we're starting to see in some of our AI deficiencies or pushback from FDA, like, kind of like a strange question. I don't know why they asked this.
And I don't think we can overstate the difficulty of having your first job out of school for a lot of these people, having that first job being a remote job. And then again, missing all that collaboration that you were talking about, Kevin, Allison. Some of these newer reviewers are in a very tricky spot.
Yeah, I think we've seen some inconsistency too in the AI responses, where it looks like they were written by separate people that didn't talk to each other yet. Or, we've even seen some conflicting information between the questions. It just, or one is satisfied with it, but they have a question this way versus the other way.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question. Thanks, everyone. So what were the updates and changes in FDA in 2021 that the world should be aware of or might have missed something? How about you, Kevin? Can you summarize?
Yeah, so there were several large changes in 2021. From a process improvement side, like Ryan was saying, FDA launched the eStar program, which is great. They launched it for 510Ks so far, and then de novos in January. But the purpose of this is to reduce the amount of RTA issues and hopefully decrease total time to market. They also released the 510K tracker, which is kind of cool. I mean, I think people were able to track it already externally, but now you don't have to do all that math and keeping track of the dates. So that's kind of nifty. And in addition to those process improvements, they've released a lot of training aids and a lot of guides for industry, right? So kind of what we heard with Anindita's talk for digital health, a lot of white papers coming out of that group and focus on fostering innovation in that area. But we also see it in the de novo space, right? They finalized several de novo rules, providing clarification on the process, as well as cross-cutting guidances like the MR one. But I think most exciting, at least for me, is the STEP program, which is kind of like the breakthrough, but really focused on providing another pathway for these innovative devices.
So Allison, you've worked on many STEP applications, right? What's been your experience with it?
It's been really interesting. I know that the program, it was only sort of rolled out in March of this year. I think as of October, there had only been 6 of them that had made it through the program and been entered or granted access to the STEP, or I always hate saying STEP program because the P is program. But the exciting thing is, you still get that expedited interaction with FDA, or that collaborative interaction with FDA. You get faster turnaround time for, sprint discussions and pre-submission meetings. There's, you don't need to be a device that's meant to cure, treat, or diagnose, prevent a life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating disease. You're actually not supposed to be for a life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating disease. And some of our clients that had not made it through the breakthrough pathway, it was perfect timing, because then we were able to turn it around and resubmit as a STEP. And FDA, asked a few questions based on that program, maybe revise some of the indications to really fit within the program. And then we got entered into the program. So it's pretty exciting. And also, I think the folks at FDA are interested. Breakthrough's been around for a few years now. And I think STEP is, the new poster child to some extent. So they are looking for some wins in this department. So I do encourage companies, if they feel like they do have a device that may have reasonable expectation that it's safer than what else is out there, to submit to the program.
You were one of the early adopters, I think, right? You have like a third of all STEP designation, which is
when I found out there were only 6, I was like, oh, two of those are ours. And it was, a similar thought process is the breakthrough. We do a lot of breakthrough submission requests, but it's, you have different, instead of criteria, they call them eligibility factors, and making sure that you fulfill, again, the first factor, at least one of the 4 second factors. So the process is similar, but the questions are clearly different.
So if someone's on the fence for it, would you recommend they do the STEP?
I would, I think, well, definitely the benefit from FDA's perspective is you have that faster interaction time with them. And, I think if they really see the value and the safety of your device being something that they want to discuss with you and help move along. I mean, that's the whole point, I guess, of these innovative pathways, is how do you get these to market faster? And so if you can have faster turnaround time on, with regard to questions about your data development plan, about your, some of the animal testing or clinical testing that you might have to do, and you can cut that time from, 75 days to 90 days to 14 days. I mean, we can get really fast turnaround time with FDA. Absolutely, that's a value to the program. I know that there are some companies that just want it for the marketing purposes, right? To be able to tell your investor that you got something through FDA that's not, you can't market it based on getting STEP, but at least you can say, FDA has reviewed one of our preliminary files and said that we are likely to be safer. Heck yeah, that's a big win.
So does that mean you can, because it's always been kind of iffy to label a 510K device as safe, like safer, right? Because there's no comparative data for clinically, but now that you have this designation, are you able to label it safe, or is it just kind of like that? So you're kind of like, oh, look, FDA said we're sort of safer, and now we can kind of just point to that, and FDA is speaking for us. Like, we're not making claims, but FDA is the one who called us safer.
That's a good point. I mean, when you look at the breakthrough numbers, 560 of them have been granted breakthrough. About 30, almost 40 of them have been made it through the pre-market process, and I think it's a third 510Ks, a third PMAs, and a third de novos. So you can see that even though something has breakthrough, it can still be a 510K. And I think that's the same first step. I mean, the two that we've gotten, one definitely will be a de novo, the other one would be a 510K. So again, I guess, it comes down to, are you expanding the indications? Maybe there's equivalence case that can be made. And I think especially for some of the software-based devices and what Annie just spoke of, that's, they may be within the realm of the regulation, and so you can stick to doing a 510K, but definitely one of the benefits will be that piece of, hey, we think we're actually safer.
What about the eStar program? Good, bad, any experience with this from anyone?
So I don't have any experience personally with it, but I like the idea of it because, the guidance mentions that the eStar format, it's intended to reflect the format and the content of what the FDA reviewers are going through when they, fill out their lead review memo. So I think it'll be helpful in the sense of helping to make submissions and reviews more efficient. Because I remember, one of the most time-consuming things, or one of the things that could be frustrating or not so efficient is, if you have to spend a lot of time searching through a submission, trying to find whatever you're looking for. Maybe you're not sure how test reports are named, and so you spend a lot of time searching for things. But with the eStar program, I think if the company is laying things out and things are placed into the kind of the format that FDA might be familiar with, I think that can really help with the speed and efficiency of reviews.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about at the top of the show about there being new reviewers and the challenge of getting them trained, and having a template like this, like the eStar template, would certainly help with getting a new reviewer familiar with the 510K format, what you expect to see and in what part of the 510K itself. Though I will say, there are a lot of companies that have their 510K templates really, really dialed in, and they're excellent. But there's also clearly some value in using the eStar template, and I would certainly recommend that.
Yeah, to echo what Brian is saying, I think there's going to be a learning curve from both sides, for both FDA and industry, right? From our side, we do have templates that work, that we've gotten submissions through. Why change something if it's not broken, right? I guess for if you're a smaller company who don't have your established templates or established forms, I think eStar would be fantastic. But for the ones, for some consulting companies or even larger companies who have established templates that have worked successfully in the past, why, it's hard to pick up a new a new tool if you don't think you need it. And then from the FDA side, from what I've heard, is that when you submit eStar, a lot of the test reports are sent as attachments to the PDF, and it's hard to kind of put them and compile them together. So a lot of reviewers are a little resistant, saying, "Oh man, this format is getting some time to get used to from what we're accustomed to, how CTS prints it." Oh, and CTS is the internal document repository of FDA.
Yeah, although I think it has triggered some questions. So people that have used the same template, this is exactly what I submitted last year, and I submit it now, and you can see that question is on the eStar template, right? So FDA is going through their checklist, and obviously, I like to make sure that anything that's in that eStar, even if I'm not using it, is covered in my submission, so that I've answered those questions and make it easy for the reviewer to find the answer to that question, that they don't have to look on page 40 of the report that's attached. I can pull that up into the summary so that it follows that, that logic and that sequence of questioning. So I think that's been helpful.
I think that's one of the questions I got from somebody was, are you scared that you're not going to have a job anymore, right? Now there's a template. We're just going to use the template and people wouldn't hire you. And to that I say, as soon as FDA has figured out how to automate and not have people at FDA and reviewing files, that's when I'll be worried about my job. But I do think, the goal of eStar, I mean, there's many goals, but one of the main ones and the benefits I see is that it's going to hopefully, speed the time of review. I mean, that was the point of the RTA process originally. If you can have really quality files hit your desk as a reviewer, and that the pieces are in there that you're going to need to make it through that administrative process and to really do a solid review of your file and send it out to your specific consults, that's a huge win. So I see the absolute benefit to this, but still it's the information that people are reviewing at FDA, and that's where yeah, I think job security from this side is still good.
I remember that's one of the biggest concerns as we were rolling out eStar, even when I was still there, was that the templates that you fill out doesn't check for adequacy, right?
Yes.
And I think it's not necessarily just like the people filling out may not know, but maybe there's been policy changes. Like I remember when the biocomp guidance came out a few years ago, the justifications that you used to give for biocomp changed from, oh, safe, long history of use, to now, oh, you'd evaluate your manufacturing process, evaluate every single step of the way. And if people who weren't up to date with all the changes would have filled out the same way, and then reviewers would now have to issue a second, like a interactive deficiency for it versus catching it in the RTA phase. So I think you're right. There's still no check for how you fill out these boxes, and you potentially just miss a potential round of FDA catching those checks early.
That's true.
So next question. What were the most impactful changes at FDA that people should be aware of and taking advantage of? Maybe not everybody caught everything.
Yeah, I think one of the things, the biocomp for intact skin devices. So
Yes.
there's a lot of devices that are just, right, they're just on the skin, healthy skin, and the components listed in there are pretty broad. It's a nice list of things. So all those times, do we really have to test this for biocomp? It's really nice to have a guidance now to point to say, yep, we're following this guidance. These materials are well established. They are known to be in, for intact skin. So I think that's been really nice.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think FDA's perspective on biocomp, especially you can see the pendulum swing sometimes at FDA with and Kevin just spoke to it, asking a lot of questions about extractables and leachables or exhaustive extraction, and then doing chemical characterization. There are companies that were like, okay, we're just going to do all the biocomp testing instead. Or if you had this intact skin or an intact skin device, doing a lot of animal testing to, demonstrate that your cotton device or your, device that is likely to be biocompatible needs to go through all this additional testing. It just seemed very burdensome. So I love that guidance document. I hope they finalize it soon.
Yeah.
And the biocomp side, they also released the Biocompatibility Assessment Center, which I actually really like. It's kind of just taking the guidance document that they issued and breaking it down into little modules that you can click through and find the parts that are relevant to your device a little quicker, which I like. But speaking of other guidances, the MR guidance I feel like always holds a place like very near and dear to my heart since I was part of the MR working group. And I think this primarily changes a lot for implantable devices. And I think FDA is still trying to figure out what they're trying to do. So one of the new requirements for the MR guidance is patient implant cards. And it seems like there's a little bit inconsistency of how it's being applied. And they're still trying to figure out how they're doing it. So it's a big deal for clients who have, especially for some of our our international clients of dealing with different regulatory body requirements of how to deal with this patient implant card requirement that's specified in the new MR guidance.
Let's talk about guidance documents. What were the newest guidance documents, and what had the biggest impact this year?
So I think I've touched on most of the ones that I thought were really important. There was but I guess the something I'd highlight again is the de novo one, just because there were so many new de novo guidances that came out. And looking through it, it seemed like the content wasn't horribly different, but now it's like finalized. At least it's finalized, which is great because now it's like a formal guidance from FDA regarding this huge pathway that's continuing to see increased number of devices and increased focus from FDA, right? And I think we're going to see more de novo devices come through in the future. So it's good to have a finalized guidance document for it.
Yeah, we've submitted quite a few de novos this year, and those guidance documents are great. I mean, it's nice to have some insight into, it not only helps us in industry and on the sponsor side of things, but also it helps the FDA reviewers, because there are a lot of if you're reviewing 510Ks most of your day, and then you get this de novo on your desk, having expectations and having the company put together the file in a consistent and cohesive manner, that's extremely helpful.
Yeah, although I have seen the agency push more towards de novo. So things that maybe in the past would have been a 510K, maybe has some technology differences or a little bit different specs, that maybe you could have explained before in a 510K. Now we're seeing, we really want to see that in a de novo. The other place I've seen it is on software, where you want to have that change plan, right? If it's not part of a special controls coming out of a de novo, they're pushing that to a de novo in order to allow that, in the future.
Would you say that's a good thing, Nancy, that more things are being pushed to de novo instead of trying to shove them into a 510K bucket?
I think it's mixed. I think for some sponsors, right, it's a huge cost and a delay in when they can get their product to market. So I think that's bad. I think in terms of making it clear going forward, it's much easier to read a de novo and know what I have to do for my next 510K if there's a de novo and that decision summary. So it depends. If it's my device, it's bad. If it's someone else's device, it's wonderful.
Yeah, I will say on the reviewer side, we sometimes see, like, before de novos are a huge thing, we saw a lot of devices get shoved into existing 510Ks. Before it was like 510K or PMA, and you're definitely not a PMA, but I guess you're slightly similar. So you see these like really ugly regulations with all this mishmash of like product codes that you're like, that doesn't seem to fit the regulation, but I guess. So yeah, I completely feel what you're saying. Where like, yeah, from a regulatory side, de novos are great, but from a manufacturer side, I could see, does add time, cost to the process.
We've had some experience with FDA recently where they've found technology different enough that they've given it a new product code instead of generating a brand new regulation. We've also used like the accessories guidance recently, and that's a very interesting pathway if you have something it augments or enhances another device. We've seen FDA, Nancy, I totally agree with you. Some groups are like, this is a de novo, just submit a de novo. Even though in one case we thought it was a perfect regulation. It defined our device to a T, except the indication was so new to FDA, and they were concerned about, public opinion about it, as well as, there are just new risks about that specific indication, that we submitted the de novo for that instead. So, but yeah, definitely, talk to FDA. I would say that's the number one thing. I don't always recommend a pre-sub because, sometimes you don't need it and you really can, your pathway. But for some cases where the regulation might not be clear, a pre-submission and, asking, you're not supposed to ask directly, is this regulation appropriate for me? FDA is just going to come back and say, submit a 513G. But what you could do is say, did we identify the appropriate predicate? And if FDA says, yes, we think that's a great predicate for you, that's a pretty good sign that you're a 510K. If they said, we do not agree with that predicate and we cannot find a predicate for you, pretty good sign that that's a de novo.
Yeah. I think the other problem with de novos, though, is you never know who else is working on one at the same time. So
True.
You submit your de novo and you get questions back that you're like, where in the heck did that come from? That is not my device, right? It doesn't even make sense for my design. And then all of a sudden, right, you see a de novo published and it's like, oh, now it makes perfect sense. Their device uses different technology, same indication, same category. I can use theirs now. I can switch to a 510K, but it's kind of painful. And I feel bad for the reviewers because you can tell they're caught. Like they want to tell you something, but they can't.
Yeah. I think that I thought was interesting change in 2021. And also when we last spoke at Reg AF, I think I heard it from you where before my understanding was like, I would never recommend a 513G. I thought 513Gs, like what's the point? FDA, I thought I was gonna get rid of them at some point because you can get almost the same information outside of a Q sub. But you were saying that this year in particular, right, that you saw more requests for 513Gs coming from the agency?
Yeah, it was interesting. I don't know the reason for that necessarily, and we ended up submitting 2 of them. And the issue I guess I had is that because everyone's so slammed and everyone's working so hard at FDA, and we saw, pre-subs getting canceled with some of the OHTs, that one of them took over 125 days. Like it was just, and it's supposed to be a 60-day window that you get feedback. So there's some point where they'll think, gosh, we should have just submitted a 510K. and either gotten kicked out because of lack of predicate, or would they have reviewed it? At least we would have had an idea within 60 days, right? Because it's on the MDUFA timeline, or the goals, that we'd at least have some sort of decision or substantive interaction by that 60-day mark. So yeah, there's some things you got to think about before you submit those 513Gs.
513Gs aren't even free, right?
Exactly. It's about the same if you're a small business, it's about the same price as a 510K.
What about pre-subs? Have you guys been able to get them lately, or is it still as bad as last year?
We had one that had the feedback came almost a half year later, and then one that got canceled, unfortunately, with the in vitro diagnostic group. But for the most part, a lot of the, orthopedics, urology, ophthalmology, like they've all been pretty good at sticking to their timelines.
Yeah. I think we've had mixed, right? Some that have been delayed. We've had, particularly at the beginning of the year, we had a couple, they were scheduled, they were ready to go. And then FDA would call and say, hey, can we have 2 more weeks? Can we meet here? Right? It's a little bit delayed. We have seen a few, I've seen a few where the feedback doesn't look like maybe they analyzed the information as deeply as they normally would have. And so you get the sense that there was some time pressure on their part to get it done in the timeline. And so then we had it, which really wasn't productive, because then we ended up going back and saying, it doesn't look like you've read the appendices, and can we get some additional detail? And they went off and met internally and then came back to us with a response, which was great because we didn't have to resubmit, but it just was a little more painful, I think, because the homework hadn't been done up front.
And I think it's kind of expected, like with Dr. Shuren spoke in like April of this year. I think he was saying that OHT, as when he announced that OHT 7 wasn't going to accept any pre-subs unless it was for breakthrough or COVID related. And he expected delays in the other divisions related to COVID products, which we're kind of seeing in the MDUFA numbers, which quick plug for RQM's blog that's coming out this month. We do a deep dive into MDUFA numbers, and it's kind of interesting because you do see an increase in meeting schedulings across the board for pre-subs. So even divisions that are doing seemingly well are still seeing delays. So you are seeing it kind of like an increase across the board for the agency.
You can definitely see the resource shortage. And I would say, for anybody from FDA watching this, we thank you for those responses we're getting at 9 at night and on Saturdays. We know the resource shortage is hard everywhere. Let's see, we have one more question. By the way, in the background, there were 2 questions that came to us in the Q&A there, but they're super specific. Like one just looking for a link. I'm going to nominate
Sorry,
you,
I
Nancy.
just answered that one.
Oh, good. There you go.
Okay.
Go ahead. Thought maybe we could just type the answer to those 2 in the background. So great. Last question for our panel. Were there any other impactful changes in 2021 or something coming in 2022? Especially you, Kevin, you've been working on the blog. Is there anything big coming that you think will be interesting?
I think MDUFA 5 will be really huge coming up in 2022. So negotiations are already taking place, and you can look at the minutes. We also have another blog going through those minutes coming out in January. So
Great.
As another teaser for other information to come. But the MDUFA 5 negotiations have already been very insightful because they both show FDA minutes and industry, and it both shows kind of where each group's focus are. And this year, or this time, it seems like they're kind of disconnected, where FDA wants to push new programs while industry is saying, hey, let's just go back to basics and address this backlog and just do what you're doing, but better.
Yeah.
Anything else, Nance?
Yeah, I think that, we're still waiting for 1345 to come through. I think it's still on the unified regulatory agenda as an action item for next year. So that'll be interesting, and it'll be interesting to see if there's a new spin to it, or if it comes out truly harmonized. Someone had a question in the chat about the eStar, and I'll answer yes, you do need Adobe for that. Yeah, I think that's all I have.
Okay.
Yeah, I think when you look at the List A and List B priority guidance documents, you can sort of see where FDA's thinking is. We had Annie speak at the beginning. Obviously, there's a lot of software documents that are still in the hopper, clinical decision support software. That's huge. I believe there's also an FDA webinar next week on pre-market content for software. So I'd recommend folks checking that out. But in terms of like huge landscape shifts, you can't really see that in the guidances or in the proposed rules or published rules. Like Nancy said, and there was a question about 13485. That's always lingering. And I think the proposed rule was supposed to be published a couple of years ago at this point, but it's still in the draft stage. So we'll see where they get with that.
We'll look to add one thing to Brian's comment, guidance documents. There are several transition plan guidance documents already in the works for 2022 for EUA devices. So for companies who are still on the market primarily using EUAs, I think it's something to be prepared for, that FDA is now on FDA's radar of how you're going to transition and what you're moving towards to after we, the need for EUAs starts to decrease.
Makes sense. All right, well, thanks again for joining us today. Hopefully this was helpful to the audience. RQM Plus holds live panel discussions just like this every other Thursday all year long. We call it our RQM Plus live show. So you can go on our website in the Knowledge Center and see all the previous recordings for topics like this one and Europe and everything going on in the regulatory world. And sign up for our blog to hear all the stuff that Kevin's been writing and to be informed of upcoming live show topics and events. So thank you. Thanks to MassMEDIC for hosting us today.
Thank you guys so much. That was really awesome. I love the roundtable format. And maybe one of you could pop a couple of those links into the chat before you drop off, just so people know how to get to your blog and get to the live events.
I'll do that. Thank you.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. So thank you again. All right, so we've got some more awesome programming coming up for you. So it is my pleasure now to turn things over to Rick Ball and Sean Burke from Duane Morris. I asked them to come and share a bit about the 510K process, and I know they're going to dive a little bit more into detail around that. So I will turn things over to you, Sean.
Great, thank you, Rachel, and thanks for having us here this afternoon, or this morning, excuse me. I'm gonna let Rick get us started here as soon as I get these slides up.
Great, thanks, Sean. I can see him.
Great.
And I gotta drop everybody down to the bottom so I can actually see the slides. So my name is Rick Ball. I'm one of the co-leads of our Life Sciences and Medical Technology group here. I thought I was actually listening to the last panel, and I think it's a great segue into ours, particularly what Sean's going to be talking about, because he's going to talk about product liability issues in the 510K. And certainly I know that manufacturers may not like the de novo process, but I think there's a lot of reasons why, at least from a product liability perspective, it might have an advantage, because it's certainly going to get a higher level of, I don't want to say a higher level, but a perceived higher level review than a 510K by FDA. So some of the plaintiff's lawyers may not be able to, if it's gone through a de novo process, it's going to take away some of the arguments that Sean's going to talk about. All right, Sean, can you bring up my first slide? I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I'm assuming that everybody knows pretty much what they're doing when it comes to a 510K. So, you need to organize in a tabulated document when you submit it to the FDA with sufficient detail for them to determine substantial equivalence, or SE, present the data logically, and the data needs to be scientifically sound. Next slide, please. So you need to include your classification, what your predicate device is, your final draft labeling, your specifications, and your performance data. And selection of your predicate device can be pretty important, or is pretty important, because selecting the right predicate device can help you in some of the things that Sean is going to talk about. Go ahead, Sean. Next slide, please. So you need to include indications for use, the specific indications, the clinical setting, pediatric, hospital, et cetera, the target population, children, adults, and everything needs to be consistent with your proposed labeling and your advertising and promotional materials. Next slide, please. And when you file, you have to include your name, the device name, the predicate device description, and a description of the intended use. The intended use needs to line up with the intended use of the predicate device. Next slide, please. So FDA will review it. They'll send you an acknowledgement letter. They'll accept it for review if you've got everything in it, and then they'll go through a substantive review. Now, the next two things are things where I know most manufacturers consider them a pain, but Sean asked me to talk about some things that actually might help you in future litigation. So if you have an interactive review with the FDA, or you have an additional information request, and you can point back and you can point back to that in the litigation, say the FDA took a really deep look at what we were doing here. Here's the interactive review we had, the back and forth. Here's the additional information requests we had from them. And here's how we responded to those. Excuse me. And then eventually you'll get a 510K decision letter. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to let Sean take over now because this is by far, because I'm sure that everybody here pretty much knows how to file a 510K. This is going to be a lot more interesting.
Thanks, Rick,
Hey,
and hopefully I
Sean,
can live up.
Hey, Sean, before you start, it looks like the slide is cut off just a tiny bit. So is there a way to, just some of the text is cut off a little bit?
Sure. Let me try something here.
Just to make sure everybody gets the full.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thanks, Rachel.
That looks better there, Sean.
Yeah, let me just I just kind of move this. Hold on real quick. How's that look, Rachel?
Much better. Perfect.
Great. All right. Well, thank you for that, and sorry for the technical difficulties. Hopefully, as Rick indicated, my presentation will be better than my ability to get a PowerPoint to fit the screen. But my name is Sean Burke. I'm a products liability attorney at the same firm as Rick, Duane Morris. I'm in our DC office. I focus my practice on defending and advising medical device clients against the risk of products liability exposure. And Rick just gave the overview of the 510K process. I got a chance to listen to the panel before, and all great information, of course, focused on this, on the idea of getting the product to market. And I get that when I talk to clients, that's obviously the focus of investors. That's the focus of the business folks. They want to get the product to market as quickly and efficiently as possible. And that's the benefit of the 510K process in many ways. The other secondary benefit you get from this process, though, historically, was that you had a pretty good piece of evidence you could put forth to the jury in the event that you were sued and facing allegations that your device harmed a plaintiff. That you have the ability to show that you went through the FDA channels. This was not a rush to market, that the proper testing ASTM standards were followed, and the FDA was aware of the risks, and regardless, they cleared the product. That was all great evidence that you could put before a jury. However, more and more is becoming the trend, if not now, I would say the rule, that this evidence of 510K clearance is not admitted at trial. Courts will exclude it. They find it's too prejudicial, and they will not allow medical device defendants to introduce their compliance with the FDA 510K clearance process in defense of these claims. And that puts these companies at a huge disadvantage because they're facing allegations of negligence, or even allegations that they acted with malice or intent, and without the ability to say, hey, wait a minute, we followed these FDA requirements. We took the time, we put the product through, the FDA had conversations with us about it, and we cleared it. Without being able to put in that evidence, the jury oftentimes just assumes the worst, and it leads to some very unfair results for medical device clients. So I want to spend my time today highlighting that issue. It's something that often surprises my medical device clients when I tell them about this, especially the business folks, that they somehow don't have the ability to use this in defense if they're dragged into court. So I want to start kind of with a big picture, a very brief sort of products liability 101, just to frame the issue. When we talk about products liability, what we're really talking about is allegations from a user, a patient, that the product was defective. That could be defective in design, in the manufacturing process, or in the labeling. And as a result of that defect, the plaintiff was harmed. It used to be a decade ago that, although obviously, complex issues within the case, the posture of a medical device case was pretty straightforward. There was a single plaintiff, and the facts and the story and the arguments were all around that plaintiff, their issues, their injuries, and their recovery. Today, however, that has completely changed. The focus is no longer on the plaintiff. The focus is on the company. And the plaintiff's bar has done a very good job of trying to paint these companies as bad actors, focusing on the idea that the defendants is somehow something that the public needs to protect themselves against. I won't belabor you with all the details, but it's a theory they've adopted called the reptile theory. And the idea is that if you can scare a jury, their instincts are to protect themselves. And they do that by awarding big verdicts. And so that's now the focus. And in addition to that, the cases are no longer individual. There are now thousands of cases. They can consolidate them in one action for discovery in front of a judge. It's called a MDL. It's a multi-district litigation. But in essence, it just results in thousands of claims being filed at one time, where all the discovery, all the focus is on the company and its wrongdoings. And you can see this is just to give you an example, but this is, this shows you the increase. It wasn't that long ago in the mid 2000s where there weren't that many lawsuits filed each year, 60, 50, 30, that's across the country implicating medical devices. Fast forward now into the late 2016, 2017, 2018, we're talking 60, 70,000 cases against medical device companies. So just a huge explosion of this type of litigation. And the reason for that, well, they're also getting big verdicts. These are some older ones here, but billion-dollar verdicts, hundreds of million-dollar verdicts. So the stakes are very high. And so as a medical device company, how do you defend yourself against that? And as I mentioned before, it used to be that some of the best evidence that you could put forth was this evidence of 510K clearance. The plaintiff's bar is very smart. They're very well organized. They recognized the potential problem they had with this evidence. So they embarked on a campaign, a successful one, to try to undermine the 510K clearance process. And they do that in short by arguing it's a shortcut, it's a rubber stamp. They'll compare a PMA file and the time and the money it takes and the huge stacks of paper, and then they'll show a 510K and how much that costs, how quickly you can get through that process, how little paper it generates, and they'll say this is a rubber stamp at best. And they've been very successful with that. And just not to get too into the weeds, but a court's job as a gatekeeper of the evidence and what it allows a jury to see, it has to balance the evidence. And what it does is on one hand, it will balance the probative value of that evidence. How important is it for a jury to see this evidence? On the other hand, they have to balance how prejudicial is this evidence. And so on the probative value side, the plaintiffs argue this is not probative at all. It's just a rubber stamp. There is no independent finding of safety and efficacy here. It just compares it to a predicate device. On the flip side, the jury, once they hear the letters FDA, will assume that there is some sort of government stamp here and unfairly assess it greater weight than it deserves. And as a result, the judges and courts have bought this argument and they have excluded this evidence from trial more and more. I would say more often than not now, courts are excluding medical device clients from introducing this evidence at trial. And this is obviously a lot of people on this will know that's kind of a misconception of the 510K process. Speaking to my clients, they're often shocked that anyone could suggest that this is a rubber stamp or some sort of quick 5-minute process. Obviously, a lot goes into it, as Rick outlined. But this has gotten a lot of traction. This is just an example from the highest court in the land. This is Supreme Court in the United States. Granted, this was in a different context. It was about the issue of preemption. But you can see how they view the 510K process. And this is a quote that is used constantly in these cases. That in contrast to the 1,200 hours necessary to complete a PMA review, the 510K review is completed in an average of only 20 hours. Section 510K notification requires little information, rarely elicits a negative response from the FDA, and gets processed very quickly. So that is the view of the court, the highest court in the land. That is the uphill battle that device manufacturers face to try to break this misconception that courts currently have about the 510K process. And so, I want to talk a little bit about some of the arguments that you can advance and how and why this is a problem in the way that us as attorneys have tried our best to correct the narrative. And really, I think the best arguments really center around fairness. These lawsuits that are brought by plaintiffs, they're alleging that the manufacturer was negligent. The hallmark of a negligent claim is that a manufacturer did not act reasonably. Well, some of the best evidence to suggest they did act reasonably will, of course, be to show that they went through the government-required process for bringing the product to market. A lot of these claims, the big verdicts I showed you, Those are all driven by claims for what's called punitive damages. In essence, that requires a finding the company acted with malice or intent or reckless disregard. And what better evidence to show the mindset of a company than to show that they went through the required channels, they complied with everything the FDA asked them to do. Again, without that evidence, it puts these companies at a huge disadvantage. And so the fairness argument has resonated a little bit with courts more recently. The other argument is jury expectations. Jurors expect that there is some sort of FDA oversight. And when they don't hear any mention of an FDA during a 2-week trial, they just assume the worst. They assume that this product didn't go through any sort of FDA review process and the company just threw it on the market with no government oversight. Obviously, that's not true and couldn't be further from the case. But that's what the jury assumes. I've had conversations with jurors where they've told me exactly that after a trial. And that's an argument that actually has resonated with courts recently. The pandemic in some ways has actually helped with that argument, because now more than ever, the general juror is aware of the FDA's involvement in bringing any device or pharmaceutical to market. And as a result, now when they don't hear it, it's even more prejudicial to the defendants. And there was a recent string of cases out of New Jersey that grabbed onto that very fact, that now more than ever in the wake of a pandemic, it's completely unfair to not allow device manufacturers to mention the 510K, because everyone's aware of the FDA process. And so that trend is something that's been helpful. Those two cases overturned, I think, a multi-$100 million verdict against some products. Unfortunately, now that's going up to review to the New Jersey Supreme Court. That's going to be something that both sides, plaintiffs and the device industry, are fighting very hard on that issue because they see the importance of it. So we'll see how that turns out. The good news right now, the device manufacturers have the upper hand. And so in addition to those kind of fairness arguments, the other arguments that we often make, as Rick alluded to, and I'll ask Rick to chime in more if he has any other thoughts in a second, but it's how you kind of correct this notion that the 510K is a rubber stamp, that it's nothing more than a shortcut. And I think there's a lot of things that you can consider or do during that process. Obviously, look, when you're putting a 510K in, your goals are to get the product to market as quickly and efficiently as possible. And I realize that some of these suggestions may not make sense for your product. The panel before talked about the pre-submission meeting. That may not always make sense. But if you're on the fence on a pre-submission or it's something you're considering, you can at least take some added benefit that down the road it could be helpful if you do find yourself in a product liability lawsuit and you're trying to argue your 510K should get in, because it shows an ongoing dialogue with the FDA from the very beginning. You brought them in, they talked about this product, they talked about the pathway. It shows there was more than just a rubber stamp here or a shortcut. Rick also mentioned, of course, whenever you get questions back, I know that makes a lot of the regulatory folks cringe when they get those, but they do have the added benefit of showing the FDA reviewed this file, the FDA raised specific questions, the company looked at those questions, they responded timely with information. That again just upends the argument that this is some sort of shortcut or rubber stamp. The other thing is just to the extent that you can well document every step of the way, the testing, the more that you can document, within, again, that's feasible within your timeframes that are set, that is all very beneficial, because we've walked courts through 510K files page by page to show them that this is, although this is not a PMA, there's a reason it's not a PMA, and it is still very much a review by the FDA. So all those facts can help. Again, I think right now is a good time to try to change this narrative in the wake of the pandemic, in the wake of some recent decisions. So I don't mean for this to be gloom and doom. The tide is changing. There's a lot of the defense bar is kind of countering this and is now very unified and trying to help device companies get this very critical evidence into courts. So Rick, any thoughts on that?
I wanted to add one thing. I know, Sean, you and I spoke about this. One place where companies can really get themselves in trouble is if they are looking to make a change to their current product and they do the analysis on whether or not they need to submit a new 510K application with it. Make sure you go through that spreadsheet, the flow chart, and that you document every step that you've taken, because you can bet the plaintiff's bar will, and they're going to attempt to show where you tried to skip something or that you should have resubmitted to the FDA because you made a material change in your product that would have required you to submit a new 510K for that product. I think that that's a place where people really get themselves into a little bit of trouble if they don't pay attention to that.
Yeah, I think
Sean,
that's
go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think that's a great point, Rick. And as an attorney who's dealt several times with minor modifications or letters to file, that is a very difficult challenge to explain to a jury when the plaintiffs are saying this product wasn't even cleared or reviewed by the FDA. They made this substantial change, and all they did was write a little letter and throw it in a drawer. I mean, that's literally the argument that we face. And to have to try to explain to a jury, no, there's this process, and walk them through that decision tree is a challenge from the start. But to Rick's point, if you have a very well documented flow chart to show that you really did go through every step of the way and why that's permissible, it can go a long way. But in general, yeah. I mean, if a 510K is a challenge, a minor modification is even more.
That's why I call it the three-ring binder defense. You want to be able to
Right.
point and say, here's all the steps that we took, and here's the evidence, and here's the people who signed off on it. The engineers signed off on it. The medical people signed off on it. The quality, everybody who was needed to sign off on it signed off on it. So we do have a question from the audience, Sean, which I think is probably better suited for you than me. Can a manufacturer use a de novo classification in a trial or a PMA?
So a couple of things on that. So the PMA is actually, I mean, it's often referred to as a gold standard of review for obvious reasons. The PMA carries with it more often than not preemption. And so if your product did receive PMA approval, that often preempts you from depending on the state, depending on the jurisdiction, a large majority of products liability claims. You can still be on the hook for some of the warning claims. Maybe there are some misrepresentations in marketing, et cetera. But your basic claims of design defect, of negligent design, failure to test, those are all preempted. And when I say preempted, in essence, it's the idea that the state law, which is what all of these claims are, they can't be viewed as sort of usurping the federal oversight, the FDA's federal oversight. And so when something has undergone the PMA review by the FDA, that is pretty much a get out of jail free card for a lot of these claims. And so, yes, I mean, you shouldn't even be in that trial setting because you should have decided most of that on the papers and the motions before you step in before a jury. Again, certain claims can still survive even with a PMA, like fraud and things like that. But a lot of claims are going to be dismissed if you have a PMA. The de novo one is, as Rick pointed out, is pretty interesting. There's not a lot of case law on it, but it does, as Rick pointed out, there are more arguments that can be made that this is more of an individual review, right? Because there is no predicate. And so they're kind of looking at that class and looking at the controls. The reality, though, is that, with the class 1 and class 2 devices, there's just not the same amount of litigation that would come against a class 3 just by the nature of it. And so there hasn't been a lot of law on de novo, but it's something that I've opined, at least, that I think you would have some stronger arguments you can make before.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think you would definitely have some stronger arguments because the de novo process is so much more interactive.
So I have a question, if you guys don't mind me jumping in. Relevant, obviously, to what we're dealing with now. Where do EUAs fall in this?
Well, that's a really interesting question because for most of the EUAs, there's the oh, Sean, I just forgot the order that prevents anybody from suing under at least the COVID-19 EUAs.
Right.
But I forgot the name of it.
The PrEP Act?
Yeah, thank you. The PrEP.
Yeah.
Thank you. The PrEP.
Right. So PrEP Act immunity is a whole different, sort of animal, and what that can write. Right.
Maybe you want to give a little description of the PrEP Act and how it works for you and how it
Yeah,
works.
sure. So, I'm not. I've given a couple presentations. And I don't have it exactly in front of me, but in some, when something is cleared for use as a qualified measure to defend against the pandemic, and the PrEP Act was, of course, enacted for COVID-19. You can get immunity and pretty blanket immunity. It's got some teeth. There's been some creative challenges around it, and the courts have upheld it for any sort of countermeasure. So, vaccines, PPE. It's got a pretty wide cast, so long as it was cleared for emergency use or cleared or acknowledged as some sort of countermeasure. A couple of interesting things around that, though. that's only about the administration of it. So if you administer the vaccine, if there are issues, and it does go through the entire supply chain. So it would protect the manufacturer, it would protect arguably the distributors. It definitely protects the doctors and the community who administers it. It even protects nursing homes. There's been a lot of debate and questions around that. But what's interesting is it doesn't protect a failure to administer. So the one group of cases, the one sort of loophole in the PrEP Act that I've seen is where someone has argued, and this was more back in the swine flu cases, but where they didn't administer a proper countermeasure. That can still put a medical provider on the hook. But as far as device clients are concerned, the manufacturer of those, you would be entitled, to, at least in a traditional products liability suit, to PrEP Act immunity. That's
right. And the PrEP Act is pretty.
Go ahead, Rick.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it. Go ahead.
I was going to say the PrEP Act is pretty broad too. It covers all the things that all the EUAs for PPE, covers the test kits. You know, as long as you're compliant with the EUA. I mean, where people get themselves into problems are obviously the ones that aren't compliant, and then they get themselves in problems with both the FDA and product liability. And you know, not just product liability, but claims under consumer protection laws.
Right. Yeah, that's been the majority of what we've seen have been more sort of consumer protection claims. And they're the ones that you'd almost expect, right? Like some of the, for lack of a better term, snake handler type salesman early on who's like, this oil will cure COVID. I mean, those guys obviously were asking for it, and they were subject to suits right off the bat. You know, there have been some more questionable ones though. So for example, there was like a teeth whitening product that made some side representations that the laser could also help kill some bacteria and prevent some disease. And that was actually grabbed onto by the plaintiffs bar and said, look, this is claiming they can cure COVID. Was nowhere in their advertisement, but that's the environment in which we live. And now they've been embroiled in some litigation as a result of that. So, you know, the one thing I'll say about the PrEP Act, and not obviously you have immunity, but I do think there's at least, you know, given the environment we live in now, given that we're in this kind of post-pandemic or pandemic world and COVID world, is I would pay careful attention to some of your advertisements and be careful of what you're saying, because they're being viewed under a different magnascope or magnifying glass than they were before. And that's just an example of that.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I think it's, you know, that's really interesting. The one last question I have, and I know we've just got a couple minutes left. There are so many different parties that touch a medical device, right? We, as an organization, we have 300 member companies, and so many of them are in the supply chain. They're in the design, they're in the development, manufacturing. How can those who are not directly responsible for putting the device into the market really protect themselves?
Sure, I think there's, Rick, I can tackle this unless you have.
Yeah, tackle it. If I may jump on and add a couple things.
Sure. Yeah, so obviously, to your point, Rachel, the law is pretty broad in who's considered to be in the supply chain and the chain of distribution, and can be subject to, at least in theory, into products liability exposure right from the beginning. So the sales reps, the distributors, the suppliers, they can all be subject. Now, I mentioned this before on a MassMEDIC presentation. They're not always likely going to get named because the plaintiff's looking for the deeper pockets, but there may be other reasons that they want to name them. One of the most common reasons is plaintiffs generally want to be in state court. They don't want to be in federal court. One of the ways of making sure you stay in state court is to find a local defendant. And so that's why sales reps are right for the choosing, or suppliers may be right for the choosing. And so, on the supplier side in particular, what I always recommend is to pay careful attention to your supply agreements with the manufacturers. There's usually indemnity in there. You want to understand sort of how that indemnity flows. You want to understand when it attaches, when it doesn't, what your liability is, what your exposure could be, what the soft spots are. So, if you're negotiating one, it's a good idea to consult with an attorney. If you have one, probably a good idea to have an attorney take a look at it so they can advise you, here's some weaknesses there, just so you can go back to your business folks and explain potential risks.
Yeah, the one thing I was going to say is you should have good indemnity agreements in your supplier agreements and things like that. I mean, because it's a little bit complicated, because if you're using a contract manufacturer, and the only thing you're doing is providing but you're you're the 510K holder, you know, if you're the 510K holder, but you're using a contract manufacturer, you want to make sure that your agreements reflect and properly balance who should be liable for what, and how the indemnities should flow. So if it's a manufacturing defect that causes the lawsuit, that's, you know, that should be on the manufacturer. If it's a design defect, that should probably fall on the 510K holder. And parsing those two things can sometimes be very difficult, because often you'll get sued for both.
Right. No, and that's a great point, Rick. And sometimes it's on the manufacturer if during the process they realize that maybe there was some issue with the material provided,
Right.
and then they have to, you know, consider some sort of indemnity, you know, lawsuit against the supplier. So you're right, kind of understanding, you know, how those contracts play out, understanding what you're liable for, what the supplier is liable for. It can get a little murky, and so it's definitely something you gotta keep your eye on.
And that's definitely something where your quality agreement with your manufacturer can help you identify the places for which they would have responsibility and the places for which you would have responsibility. Looking at that allocation, grid allocation in the quality agreement can be very helpful.
Right, and I would just say, you know, tying it back into the FDA talk, you know, we've talked a lot about the 510K evidence, but the other evidence that hasn't been subject to the same attack is, you know, FDA compliance, and that when the FDA has done some quality inspections, that evidence courts still will allow in, especially in a manufacturing defect case. So that can go a long way to show that there were audits and that there were no issues found. The FDA reviewed your quality controls and found everything to be in spec. That helps too.
Awesome. Sean, Rick, thank you both so much for putting this presentation together. It's actually one of the more interesting topics in my personal opinion, which is why I always ask you guys to talk about this, because I think it's really, it's a tricky kind of thing to maneuver and understand, and protecting yourself is clearly of the utmost importance. So thank you guys for doing that.
Sure thing. Thanks, Rachel. Thank you for having us, Rachel.
Absolutely. Okay, well, I'm going to turn things over now to Brian Johnson.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Rick and Sean, and thank you to our earlier panelists from RQM Plus, and of course, Annie Saha from the FDA. I'm going to kind of transition now to the 11 o'clock portion of our program, and welcome again. Welcome back. I'm going to reintroduce us. I am Brian Johnson. I'm the president of MassMEDIC, and this next section, as we bring on Lieutenant Colin Tack from the United States Public Health Service Medical Device Investigator. Morning, Lieutenant Tack. Lieutenant Tack, before I hand it over to you, I want to talk to you just quickly about, you know, the history of this program. Actually, we have two longtime partners who always help us bring this portion to the program: ASQ Medical Device Division New England Discussion Group, and our friends over at the RAPS Boston chapter. I want to thank David Leo from the RAPS Boston chapter and Pam Goldstein from the ASQ chapter for always helping us shape this part of the narrative. So, Lieutenant Tack, I want to welcome you. We're going to go all into medical device investigations and an update on what's gone on this year. And I always know this is a very popular program. So I can just turn the reins over to you, and I'll be here hanging out, making sure that everything moves slowly, and I'll monitor the Q&A tab for you.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, sir. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I just want to add the caveat that I think this year's presentation might be a little bit different than in years past. Where it's not going to be a traditional, update on our completed activities and such, but the scope of it is more so, how firms can use the inspection process to benefit them. Let me just adjust my settings to make sure that everything runs smoothly. All right. All right, so hello everyone. As Brian mentioned, thank you for the introduction. My name is Lieutenant Colin Tack. I am a medical device investigator with the U.S. Food and Drug Administration's Office of Regulatory Affairs, within the Office of Medical Device and Radiological Health Operations Division 1, often referred to as OMDRO, stationed in Jamaica, New York. Also an engineer officer in the U.S. Public Health Service. If you're unaware what USPHS is, it's one of the 8 uniformed services in the U.S. and is composed of officers from various health professions that are stationed at agencies throughout the federal government who respond to missions both at home and abroad in addition to their agency work. And today I'll be discussing, how you can uncover and maximize the value of FDA inspections. And thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. All right, so picture this. You're on the regulatory team at a firm and you just learned that FDA has arrived for inspection. How do you react? I hope your team doesn't react like this, but the point I'm trying to make is that FDA inspections can be intimidating or even scary, and that's definitely understandable. So there may be several different reasons why inspections are intimidating. You may be at an experienced firm, but you personally may have never been involved in an inspection. Or you may be at a smaller firm where really nobody has experience being part of an inspection. But either way, you or your firm may be in a position where you just don't know what to expect. An extra layer of pressure may be added if the reason for the inspection is for cause, maybe due to some previous issues or complaints. You may realize that no matter how good your quality system is, things can always just go wrong and issues can end up slipping through the cracks, especially when dealing with a large portfolio of devices. You may realize that you have room for improvements to your quality system, but you just can't fix everything at once. You may not have the time and resources to do so. And finally, for those working in the regulatory groups, management may see compliance as your job, not theirs, and therefore put the responsibility for the outcome of the inspection on you or your team. So in this presentation, I'll describe the benefits that are provided by FDA inspections in regard to patient safety, design and quality system robustness, how to reduce failure costs, using inspections to avoid quality events, benefits to smaller firms, and using inspection data as a benchmarking tool. I'll also be sharing some short audio clips from OMDRO employees to highlight different perspectives based on their individual roles and expertise. All right, so first, the focus of FDA inspections is always going to be patient safety. And that's because the public counts on FDA to protect them. And also, an FDA inspection with no objectionable conditions is viewed positively by stakeholders, these stakeholders being investors, end users, patients, and the general public. One question you may ask yourself is, are you comfortable using your firm's device? And if not, why not? What's the reason? And importantly, can you do something to improve the quality or safety of your device? Or, on the other hand, you may have an excellent quality management system and be confident in your product's quality and safety. But aren't you worried about what your competitors are doing and whether their devices are safe? How about other device types that your firm doesn't handle? It's important to realize that everyone will be a patient within their lifetime and will likely depend on devices. So would you be more comfortable with a device that has successfully gone through an FDA inspection? I think the answer for many would be yes. Now, I'd like to share a perspective from OMDRO Compliance Officer Sean Moynihan, who drives home the point that FDA inspections and any subsequent actions intended to improve the quality of devices are rooted in ensuring patient safety.
Hello, my name is Sean Moynihan. As a compliance officer at FDA, one of my major responsibilities is assessing both violations of the law
Oh, sorry about that.
and corrective actions to protect public health. Compliance branch communication strategies and risk-based regulatory actions help reduce patient harm and ensure a positive public health outcome. Hello. My name.
All right. So how often does the public encounter medical devices? So per the CDC, 84% of adults and 93% of children in the U.S. have contact with a healthcare professional each year. Even routine office visits depend on the safety and efficacy of several medical devices, such as pulse oximeter, blood pressure cuff, ophthalmoscope, and more. Now, what is the prevalence of medical device implants in the US? Just to give a snapshot of a few implantable devices, the CDC estimates that each year patients in the US receive 370,000 cardiac pacemakers and 1 million total hip and total knee replacements. In addition, data from the CAP PCI registry show that more than 600,000 coronary stents are implanted annually in the US. Data from a 2014 Mayo Clinic orthopedic study showed that 7.2 million Americans have had total hip or total knee arthroplasty and are living with implants. So basically, it's FDA's mission to ensure that all these patients are implanted with safe, effective, and quality devices. For a brief historical perspective, FDA became a public health agency out of necessity because FDA wanted to protect the public from unproven or harmful products. The authority to conduct factory inspections was formally authorized by the 1938 Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And at the bottom of the slide are some fun examples of some quack devices that FDA has encountered in the past. Excuse me. On the left is an orgone energy accumulator. So orgone was claimed to be a universal healing force, and the creator claimed the device could gather up and administer concentrated doses of orgone to people, and that it could cure colds, arthritis, ulcers, and even cancer. The creator was actually sent to prison after continuing to sell the devices after being ordered by FDA to stop. The middle image shows vision diader glasses that were invented in the 1970s and claimed to use secret European color technology to curb cravings and hunger pangs. It would be great if true, but most of the glasses ended up being destroyed by FDA. And finally, the image on the right is an oscilloclast, which claimed to play back electronic waves into the body, therefore creating harmony within the body and eradicating diseases. FDA ended up prosecuting the creator in the 1950s for those false claims. Now, it's important to realize that the quack devices described in the previous slide are not just relegated to history. Since COVID emerged, FDA has identified many nefarious actors seeking to exploit consumers during the pandemic by selling unproven products, often with fraudulent claims. As of June 2020, which was just a few months into the pandemic's surge in the US, FDA had already identified more than 700 fraudulent and unproven medical products related to COVID-19. And from the investigator perspective, FDA investigators have conducted several sampling activities for face filtering respirators, for example, N95 and KN95 respirators, in addition to COVID-19 test kits. We've also responded in the field to complaints of questionable COVID-19 test kits, both at manufacturing facilities and user facilities. And, just in general, the public does rely on these products now more than ever, and we all benefit from having proven COVID-19 related devices and products on the market. Now, switching gears here, but still relating to operations that impact patient safety, you may be unfamiliar with our operations under the Mammography Quality Standards Act, or MQSA. So FDA partners with 45 states and territories, either through contracts or agreements, to inspect all 8,600 plus mammography facilities across the country annually. So Amdro's staff of 20 specialists conduct over 800 inspections in states without contracts and at federal facilities, including military bases in 6 countries around the world. In addition, our specialists execute compliance follow-up activities for all facilities and conduct audits of the state's inspectors. Now, I'd like to share a perspective from MQSA Specialist Lieutenant Commander Matt Morrison, who in his role ensures that Americans have access to safe and effective mammograms.
Hello, my name is Lieutenant Commander Matt Morrison. As an MQSA Specialist, I ensure that facilities, including international military installations, provide safe and effective mammograms. By being the boots on the ground for the agency, I feel that I have a real impact on the industry through oversight and compliance enforcements, contributing towards favorable breast cancer survival rates. Hello, my name.
Just to provide you with a snapshot of how many inspections Amdro conducts. In fiscal year 2019, Amdro completed 1,225 domestic inspections, 458 foreign inspections. In addition, we've completed many MQSA inspections and RAD health inspections as well. So fiscal year 2019 was the last typical year we've had, since fiscal years 2020 and 2021 have been very atypical due to COVID. However, in fiscal year 2020, Amdra was still able to complete 630 domestic inspections and 166 foreign inspections. And I apologize, I don't have the data available for fiscal year 2021. Now, I'd like to share a perspective from a member of Amdra's foreign cadre, Brittany Franklin. So members of the foreign cadre are stationed here in the U.S., but conduct only international inspections to augment the FDA staff who are stationed at FDA offices abroad within the Office of International Programs. Ms. Franklin ensures the safety and quality of medical devices that are imported in the U.S.
Hello, my name is Brittany Franklin. As a member of the foreign cadre at OMDRHO, my duties include ensuring that all imported medical devices and radiological health products are in compliance. International inspections promote consistent product quality, preventing non-conforming products from reaching the American public. Hello.
All right, switch gears from talking about patient impact associated with FDA inspections, now discuss the benefits that inspections provide to design robustness. So FDA investigators have the opportunity to observe the operations of many different firms and are able to essentially see what works and doesn't work across firms making the same or similar commodities. It's important to realize that firms may be so close to their own process that it may be hard to consider how their process looks to an outsider. However, a big takeaway is that FDA investigators may focus on common areas where deficiencies are often found, and the questions they ask during inspections can give you insights into best practices. For example, investigators may ask questions based on what we've seen at other firms. Being able to quickly and sufficiently answer the questions may provide you with positive feedback that you're doing things correctly. For another example, if an investigator needs to ask several questions as to why certain things were done as part of your, say, design validation, that may indicate that your procedures lack sufficient robustness in describing what should be done. Or a third example, if it takes 2 or 3 hours to explain and justify to an investigator why something was done a certain way, and at the end of the discussion, the investigator found no issues and everything looked okay, this indicates that your record keeping may not be as robust, since the records should be able to speak for themselves and be able to justify what was done without having a long discussion. Now, on the topic of record keeping, I realize that documentation and detailed record keeping may be seen as a burden. However, good record keeping will help you out in the long run. For example, if you identify a new risk and add it to your DFMEA and appropriately mitigate the risk, but you fail to document what was done to mitigate the risk in your DFMEA, even if the mitigation was documented elsewhere, this could lead to problems in the future. If in the future you have a new employee working on the design project that doesn't know the history of the DFMEA and needs to know what was done to mitigate that specific risk, that information wouldn't be readily available because it wasn't documented. So the point is that things should be documented and also be documented in the correct place. And that will also help the inspections run smoother as well. The inspection process can also allow firms to develop more effective feedback mechanisms using field data such as complaints and integrating these into the product and process design stage. And lastly, data and information from inspections can be used to inform your ongoing risk management process. Data such as FDA 483s of industry peers, warning letters, recalls, and MDRs. And I'll expand on this topic later in the presentation. So in general, FDA inspections can facilitate a robust quality system. So before an inspection ever happens, simply preparing for the inspection can help build up your quality system and lead to improved device quality. So it's important to realize that preparing for a successful inspection should never be a one-time event. And successfully maintaining your quality system should be ongoing and really part of your organization's culture. And being perpetually ready for inspections is good for business and device quality. Specifically, shareholders may look more favorable on inspection readiness. And finally, publicly available data from industry peers can be used to make improvements to your quality system, as I'll discuss later on. So after you complete an FDA inspection, there are some different but related benefits to your organization. So at the end of an inspection, I'm sure that receiving an FDA 483 is not looked upon positively by your firm. But 483 observations may sometimes be what's needed to inspire your management to invest in your quality system or in device quality in general. Some observations can also be used to strengthen your internal audit program. If FDA discovers an issue that wasn't captured by your internal audits, why wasn't it captured, and what changes need to be made to ensure that future issues are captured internally. At the end of an inspection, there are discussion items, or sometimes referred to as verbal observations, that are communicated verbally to management at the inspection closeout meeting that are deemed to not merit inclusion on the FDA 483. So firms have the ability to address these items to improve quality before they may rise to the level of being included on a 483 during a subsequent inspection. Also, after the inspection, your firm will receive a copy of the Establishment Inspection Report, or EIR, which is written by the investigator. So reviewing this EIR closely will allow you to further understand the thought process of the investigator and have a separate accounting of the inspection other than your own. Also, it isn't just about what FDA finds during an inspection. So near misses are issues that are brought to light by the inspection that the investigator just may not have covered. For example, from the firm perspective, in reviewing training records the morning of the inspection, your firm may notice an individual with a missing training item that's required, but during the course of the inspection, the investigator didn't request to review that specific record. You now have the opportunity to address this item without it being found by the investigator. Or maybe there's an even larger issue that's left uncovered. For example, during a level 1 QSIT inspection that only covers 2 quality subsystems, the FDA investigator may choose to review the production and process control system rather than design controls, for example. This might be a relief to you because, in preparing for the inspection, you may notice some issues or inconsistencies with your design process that would be impossible to fix prior to the start of the inspection. Basically, inspections facilitate the identification of these near misses and allow your firm to act on making corrections and quality improvements. And lastly, an FDA investigator cannot feasibly look at everything during the inspection. So it's important to use what you learned from what the investigator did explore and apply it to other areas within your quality system or other devices or design projects that were not covered by the investigator during the inspection. So FDA inspections can also allow your firm to avoid failure costs. So just the notion or expectation of FDA finding an issue during an inspection can inspire your firm to take more robust preventive or corrective actions at the onset of issue identification. So taking more robust preventive and corrective actions will likely result in improved quality. Even in the result, or even in the event that a device recall is necessary, being able to develop a robust recall strategy, knowing that once you do have an inspection, the investigator will look at it closely, will aid in the development of a more robust investigation and corrective actions. And this in turn can reduce the chances of recurrence of the issue. Now I'd like to share a perspective from AMDRO Recall Coordinator Teresa Kirkham, who discusses the importance of having clear recall strategies.
Hello, my name is Teresa Kirkham. I'm a recall coordinator working with CDRH to process recalls, including assisting firms with their recall strategy. Recall notices play a large role in a firm's recall strategy and are the most effective at preventing harm when they're clearly written. Together, we can ensure the safety of the public, including your customers.
All right, so this slide shows an excerpt from a report published in October 2013 by the McKinsey Center for Government, which shows that non-routine quality events, such as major observations, recalls, warning letters, and consent decrees cost the industry between $2.5 billion and $5 billion per year on average. The report goes on to state that adopting best practices would cut these costs in half, and these best practices include increasing quality across the organization and making continuous improvements to the quality management system. So on the topic of recalls, note that the estimated cost of recalls is around $2 million. Having a robust recall strategy would facilitate appropriately addressing the issues and making meaningful corrections to prevent recurrence and save resources in the long run. But besides that, what else can we do to avoid these so-called non-routine quality events? Now, I believe that firms could utilize FDA inspections to avoid these non-routine quality events. Some best practices include looking at issues found at other firms during their FDA inspections through the Freedom of Information Act requested 483s or warning letters that are already publicly available on FDA's website. You can also listen closely to FDA questions during inspections to determine what is really driving the questions, which can give you insights into best practices. Of course, taking copious notes during inspections and investigating those near misses, as we previously discussed, which will allow you to develop a robust after-action plan following an inspection. And finally, looking critically at competitor recalls and MDRs prior to an inspection of your firm to assess the robustness of your own reporting decisions. For example, if all of your competitors are reporting an adverse event differently than you, it may indicate that a change to your complaint handling or MDR reporting process may be necessary. Now, switching gears here a little bit, I want to highlight the benefits that FDA inspections provide to smaller firms. So according to the U.S. International Trade Administration, more than 80% of medical device companies consist of fewer than 50 employees, and many startup companies have little or no sales revenue. With limited sales revenue and resources, it may be difficult to justify investing in the organization's quality system. With that said, FDA inspections can facilitate improvement of the quality system of these smaller firms and give a necessary justification to investing in quality. And FDA investigators during the inspection can also key the firm in on guidance documents, standards, and regulations that apply to them. And over time, inspections can gradually increase the firm's quality system and therefore improve device quality and reduce risk to patients. And finally, for these smaller firms, positive inspection results are looked upon favorably by stakeholders. Now, this chart is another excerpt from the 2013 McKinsey report showing how serious adverse events, or SAEs, which include death, life-threatening events, hospitalization, and disability, increased about twice as fast as the overall device market growth from 2001 to 2009. Although these data are from over a decade ago, I think that the trend just cannot be ignored and is likely continuing today. The chart on the left shows the number of patients injured in SAEs each year from 2001 to 2009, showing a stark increase in events with an even larger increase in more recent years. The chart on the right shows the number of patients injured in SAEs per $1 billion spent on medical devices. So the chart on the right is normalized for the growth of the device industry that occurred across this range, and it still shows an increase in serious adverse events. So how can we increase quality and be able to reverse this trend? So I think part of the solution is the FDA inspection process, which can foster quality improvements over time. Our data from 2008 to 2017 shows that 82% of firms corrected observed violations on follow-up inspections. More recent data from fiscal year 2018 to 2021, we've seen that 89% of firms have corrected observed violations on follow-up inspections. So we can see that in more recent years, we're seeing more quality improvements made by firms that are facilitated by the inspection process. The main takeaway is that FDA inspections facilitate compliance. Compliance fosters quality improvements and provides benefits to patients. I believe that part of the story is that we're also seeing an increase in inspection consistency, which is facilitated by a program alignment, which was implemented by ORA in 2017. So after program alignment, investigators conducting device inspections are specialized in conducting only device inspections, which results in a high level of technical expertise, focused training, and discernment, and a more uniform application of ORA's policies and procedures. Now, I'd like to share a perspective from Amdro medical device specialist Adelise Santeliz-Cruz, who discusses the impact of inspections on the firm's quality system over time. Please note that Adelise is stationed in Puerto Rico and her audio clip is in Spanish. So if you don't understand Spanish, then follow along with the English translation on the slide.
Hola, mi nombre es Adalys Santeliz Cruz. Soy especialista en dispositivos médicos de Omdro División 2. En inspecciones complejas, proporciono una revisión objetiva y una perspectiva regulatoria, fortaleciendo aún más los sistemas de calidad. Mis inspecciones han resultado en establecimientos regulados que continúan cumpliendo con la ley durante años después. Hola.
Now, I want to discuss the use of inspection data as a benchmarking tool. specifically the benefits of using publicly available data of industry peers to benefit your organization. So FDA 483s of industry peers can be obtained through a FOIA request and will allow your organization to see common issues that affect other firms. This can be used to help avoid these issues or look closely at how your own processes compare to the regulations or the specific citation in that 483. This will allow you to know which process areas were covered in other inspections, which may help you prepare for future inspections. Also, the ORA FOIA electronic reading room on FDA's website contains some select 483s, 483 responses, untitled letters, warning letter responses, consumer complaint records, and other records that are related to ORA domestic inspections. So FDA makes these records publicly available either proactively at FDA's discretion or because they are frequently requested through FOIA. FDA warning letters are posted on the FDA warning letter page on FDA's website. Reviewing the letters sent to device firms will allow your organization to learn the conditions as discovered through FDA inspections that led to the warning letter issuance. So being able to monitor and review the FDA warning letter page should be considered as part of your firm's practices. Recalls are posted on FDA's recalls, market withdrawals, and safety alerts page, which allows you to read a summary of the recall and the company's announcement. Reading the announcement will allow you to realize the conditions that led to the recall and apply any lessons learned to your organization and quality system. And finally, MDRs are posted on the Manufacturer and User Facility Device Experience Database, which is commonly referred to as the MAUD database. You can search for event reports by product problem, event type, manufacturer, brand name, product code, and some other fields. And searching the MAUD database allow you to consider the robustness of your own MDR reporting decisions. And it's also important to note that FDA inspections ensure compliance with the recall and MDR regulations to help ensure that the data from these sources are more reliable. So this inspection data can also be beneficial to your risk management process, which should be done prior to product release and also should be ongoing. So risk management involves identifying known and foreseeable hazards based on the device intended use, reasonably foreseeable misuse, and normal and fault conditions. So what is reasonably foreseeable misuse? So the Quality System Regulations Preamble, comment number 159, states that FDA acknowledges that a manufacturer cannot possibly foresee every single potential misuse during the design of a device, but when the manufacturer becomes aware of the misuse, the corrective and preventive action requirements should be implemented to determine if redesign of the device or labeling changes may be necessary. So the important piece is becoming aware of the misuse. And it could be through competitor complaints. The publicly available data previously described in the last slide, for example, recalls and MDRs can be used to help identify such hazards and mitigate associated risks, both during the design and development stages and also throughout the device's total product life cycle. Some other resources that are helpful include the preamble to the Quality System Regulations, which has a bit of discussion about risk that isn't specifically mentioned in the actual regulations themselves. And that preamble basically goes through public comments that are received during the development of the QSR. Also, the Global Harmonization Task Force, or GHTF Risk Management Guidance, ISO 14971, which was the application of risk management to medical devices, and ISO 24971, which is the guidance on the application of ISO 14971. Now, I'd like to provide the top 5 device FDA 483 observations as it relates to the quality system regulations for fiscal year 2019. So this may give you some perspective on areas that FDA will likely focus on during an inspection. And in closing, I'd just like to summarize the key takeaway that FDA inspections can be intimidating, but are beneficial to both industry and patients, and to look at the opportunities that the inspection process presents to your organization. Specifically, inspections can foster quality improvements over time, can be used to avoid quality events, and how to use data to benefit your organization. I just want to thank the following individuals for helping put this presentation together. Thank you for your attention, and I really hope you found this presentation informative.
Thank you, Lieutenant Tack. Great presentation, really exciting. I love the guy with the colander on his head and the I could see a whole program of that. Lieutenant Tack, we do have to kind of transition quickly to our Washington update, but I was wondering if you could possibly answer the question we have here about FDA inspection differing from an MD-SAP audit. If that's something you can answer real quick, we could do it live, or if you want to type the answer in that, we can do it that way.
Sure. If you don't mind, I just want to reference some information on FDA's website. I'm not an MD-SAP specialist. I can definitely say that typical FDA inspections are more involved than MD-SAP audits, but I'll have to defer to the information on the FDA website for the specific differences between FDA inspections and MD-SAP audits.
Absolutely. I think I had a little cutout on your audio. Did you give the URL for that, or is that?
I'll post it in the chat.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Lieutenant Tack. Thanks for everything. Happy holidays, and we really appreciate your participation. So we're going to move on now to our final presentation, which is going to be hosted by Anthony DeMeo, our good friend from Washington, D.C., and from ML Strategies, another one of our great sponsors and partners. And we'll be also welcoming Todd Gillenwater from Medtronic to the program. Anthony, we're going to talk a little bit about Cures 2.0. Is that correct?
That's right. And I've got some slides. Can you see them yet?
I can see them. They're a little oriented to the left.
I can. Yeah.
I wonder why that is. Hold on. Let me try this. Is that any better?
We can see it, but we can also see your notes.
Yeah, see your notes and everything.
Okay. All right. Well, how's that? No?
No.
All right. Hold on.
Oh, the joys of Zoom.
Is that better?
I don't see anything here now.
Okay. What if I go to slideshow? Is that better?
You're not sharing anymore.
I'm not. Yeah, I don't see anything. No shared screen.
All right. Well, let's start with that, and I'll try to get it going. First of all, we've got a truncated timetable here, so we'll try to go through it. Thank you once again, MassMEDIC, for having us. Again, my name is Anthony DeMeo with ML Strategies in Washington. I'm working today with one of MassMEDIC's great members of the Washington Reps Group, Todd Gillenwater, with Medtronic, and it is a true privilege to be alongside him. And as Brian said, we're going to talk a little bit about Cures 2.0, or 21st Century Cures 2.0. This is HR 6000 for those keeping score at home. This is it's a release last month, I think in the middle of November, after much anticipation. It builds on the bipartisan 21st Century Cures Act of 5 years ago. It's ambitious, it's expansive, and we couldn't possibly talk about all of it. But given the focus and the thrust of today's webinar, we're going to focus on a few of the most relevant FDA-related provisions. And I've tapped Todd, who follows us very closely for his company, to provide his insight. While we're going to talk about FDA, there are whole titles in this bill dedicated to public health and pandemic preparedness, Medicare, and research. So those are certainly going to impact this community, and we encourage you to take a look at the information Congresswoman Diana DeGette from Colorado and her colleague, the Republican original co-sponsor, Congressman Fred Upton, have released. There's bill text, there's a section-by-section summary, and there's a roundup of some of the supportive statements from industry representatives. So I recommend that you take a look at that. And if you could see my slides, I would be showing you where we're starting, which is to say Title II, Patients and Caregivers. And even if we have to see the rest of it, that's okay with me.
There we go.
Does that look right?
Yep.
All right, I nailed it. So Section 203, I think, is the sort of the most critical out of this Title II. Title I is the pandemic preparedness public health one. Title II is called patients and caregivers. It covers a whole range of things. But I think most critical and something that a lot of people have been keeping a close eye on is efforts to increase diversity in clinical trials. And I think this section does a good job of sort of addressing a hot button issue of equity in healthcare without being too onerous. Todd, how would you frame it?
No, I'd absolutely agree. You know, the issue of diversity in clinical trials, which is part of, I think, you know, accurately, fairly importantly, part of the some of the other broader work around healthcare equity, diversity, is important to note in terms of, you know, not only this legislation, but, you know, there are obviously other pieces of legislation that have been introduced or are likely to be introduced that key in on this very issue. And you know, we're Medtronic, we're supportive of this provision. Think it's an important provision to continue that work to make sure that clinical trial participants really represent the makeup of the population, you know, that those technologies in this case would treat. And you know, one thing I'd also note, Anthony, it's really important to note, you know, if we were to go back to the introduction, that this bill number is HR 6000, which was, you know, purposeful on the part of Mr. Upton and Ms. DeGette. The 21st Century Cures Act from a few years ago was HR 6. So, you know, they did their work to wait to get this introduced until they could get that 6000. So just wanted to note that for the record.
Yeah. And I think now that I've got it figured out here, here's our title slide. We'll go backwards here. So we'll move on, not to say that there's not plenty more to talk about in Title II, but we'll move on to Title III, which is you know, titled the Food and Drug Administration. And we've highlighted here on the screen, you'll see 3 sections that we're going to hit. But as you can see, there's a lot to sift through. And I think that, you know, as I said at the top, it's worth getting through the summaries, and if you've got questions, by all means, channel them through Brian, and we'll do our best to you know, try to provide the right insight. But I think for the most key, you know, elements, I think that relate to this group, it's 301, 304, and 305. What would you agree, Todd?
Yeah, and I would agree for maybe a couple of different reasons. One, you know, with Section 301, as is highlighted here, it's a report. So, you know, it doesn't have the force of law in terms of policy, but it calls for a report on aligning work within the FDA on digital health technologies, and would urge folks to look at the bill because they actually have a definition for digital health technologies, which is pretty expansive. It might not include everything. And, you know, to that point, I know that the authors are going to be continuing to look for feedback to make sure that the bill is as perfected as possible. So, you know, that's obviously a report. Section 304. So Section 304, sorry.
So it does include wearables and some software as a device, and, you know, things that our group here is increasingly into. So as you say, maybe not comprehensive, but you know, there's room
pretty broad.
Pretty broad.
Pretty broad. And you know, I know we're focused on Title III, but I'd also, you know, note that in the Medicare title, there is another section that calls for a report on alternative treatments. I can't remember the exact title, but they define alternative treatments as kind of digital, and that Medicare kind of provisions definition of digital is actually a lot narrower than the FDA side. So I think that's kind of interesting, but important to acknowledge the growing acknowledgement by congressional offices such as Representatives Upton and DeGette, and even beyond there on digital health, and in this context with regards to the FDA.
Good progress.
With, you know, I think maybe the one of the key differentiators between Section 304 and 305 is where medical devices fit in. When the discussion draft of this legislation was first distributed and offered for stakeholder feedback, Section 304, the real world evidence section, only provided for use of RWE in the kind of the drug context. The bill as introduced expands to include devices. Section 305 on improving communications between FDA and CMS regarding transformative new therapies. The discussion draft was limited to drugs, and the bill as introduced is limited generally to drugs as well. And that's one area where I think Medtronic, the broader med tech sector, in providing feedback on the discussion draft had encouraged and asked and urged that both of those sections be expanded to include devices. So Section 304 RWE section was, the communications provision was not. I expect that we will be going back to those offices and encouraging them to include devices in that section as well. I will say I kind of maybe suspect that the reason they didn't do that in Section 305 is because there's the MCIT provision under Medicare. So.
Right, and it's a longer conversation, but I know since it's important to the group, it's worth mentioning, and it certainly it's a good segue from 305. There is, we've put a lot of hours and resources and political capital behind saving MCIT, trying to get that rulemaking back on track, encouraging a swift reissuance of the rule under this administration. This bill in Title IV does actually codify MCIT with a transition pathway to coverage, and then a permanent one. And I think does a pretty good job of addressing the issues that CMS raised, when they pulled that rule. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, absolutely. In fact, with that provision, I know there was some work to attempt to respond to some of CMS's questions and concerns when it came to evidence development requirements and whether or not ultimately CMS would have the authority to withdraw that breakthrough designation and breakthrough coverage if there were concerns down the road about safety, effectiveness, applicability in the Medicare population. So. Yeah,
certainly we don't want to wait for, and we'll talk about the political analysis here in the next slide, but we don't want to wait for legislation to get this pathway established formally, but it is good to know that there is that there's more than a discussion draft on it now. This is, as we said, introduced legislation in the House, and that does segue to sort of our analysis. I mean, obviously it was, as I said, introduced in the middle of last month. Here we are now scrambling to get a couple of things done and then go home. We're coming into an election year. This is a big, ambitious bill to move at any time or in any Congress, but you've got the House in play, control the House in play next year. As you can see, it's bipartisan, but it's lopsided. You don't have a lot of big name Republicans in the House on this yet. So I think, a lot of this depends on what happens, 11 months from now. What do you think, Todd?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And if history's any guide, though, I think if we looked back at the original 21st century cures, things kind of started in the same place. And if there is anything you can say about Representatives DeGette and Upton on this, they are nothing if not tenacious. You hear them you hear them interviewed, you hear them talk about this. They talk about it not as if it gets done, but when it gets done. And I think so we want to be hopeful. We think all considered, this package, this legislation on the FDA provisions, on the other sections, on the other titles, is in balance and in full, pretty positive for advancing med tech, life sciences, research, investment, innovation, and ultimately patient care. And, but, to your point, not a lot's getting done. That said, there is the tenacity of these two members. There is the fact that next year you have the user fee reauthorization. So, whether this bill moves on its own, whether this bill is taken as part of another package in part or in whole, obviously if it was taken up or parts of it were taken up as part of the user fee authorization, it would be just that, parts of it, because there are provisions in here, for example, on Medicare, that would fall outside of MDUFA unless, colleagues at Ways and Means were willing to, kind of allow that to happen. But I think it's a pretty steep hill. But I think, there are real opportunities to see some of these provisions, if not all the provisions, seriously considered.
And to your point here, it after introduction, it was referred to 11 committees of jurisdiction in the House, showing exactly how expansive it is. For MassMEDIC's purposes, we're talking, principally about energy and commerce, which is where DeGette and Upton sit. And for us, that's Lori Trahan. Secondarily, certainly the CMS title is Ways and Means, and that's Chairman Neal. But if even a couple of these other committees assert their jurisdiction and want to carve up, certainly the provisions that touch education and labor, agriculture. We've got, it's actually referred to ag, so we've got Jim McGovern, a player there. So it's a politically difficult, procedurally difficult, but that's part and parcel of an ambitious piece of legislation. It always is. So.
Yeah, and it's part of the fun of the sausage making, right? And
Yeah.
I think another thing to note is, I think Representatives DeGette and Upton were pretty smart here in pulling into their package pieces of legislation that have already been introduced by other members. There is, again, on the MSIT, there is breakthrough device legislation already on clinical trials. There are other pieces of legislation. So I think one of the reasons they were able to get to 54 co-sponsors already is by working with some of those authors of some of those other standalone pieces of legislation, including on clinical trials, to build up a little bit of an early head of steam, which I think is important to acknowledge, even when, again, I think it's also important to acknowledge 2022 is almost already here. It's a political year, a off-cycle year. Not a lot getting done constructively, productively, certainly on a bipartisan basis. But it's an UFA year. Got to do that. And hopefully, maybe once we start into 2022 and things like Build Back Better and reconciliation are maybe behind in the rearview mirror, maybe there's an opportunity to roll up the sleeves and work on this. But the points you have on here, especially with, and I didn't even realize 11 committees of jurisdiction that's been referred to. I mean, that's pretty much the entire House almost.
Yeah, pretty close. Science, budget, it hits everybody. So look, Todd, I appreciate your help. I know you've got a hard stop here. Brian, as you can see, I'm not 100% tech savvy here. I don't know if any questions have come in, but we'll certainly work to answer them. I just want to make sure Todd gets to his next meeting without holding anybody up.
Good, we're good. Anthony, I just, quick, this is gonna fall into 22, right? I mean, we're gonna, there's no way this is even getting broached at this point. So, I mean, do we think it's, anywhere near the legislative calendar?
No, I mean, notably absent from the co-sponsors are, well, not that he would be on it as the chairman, but I'm not sure this has the support of Mr. Pallone and ENC to get a hearing anytime on the horizon, much less, get, marked up, even the ENC section. So I think we're still in the generate a groundswell of support phase of this, kind of force the issue. So
if any members in the call want to do that, the best way to do that is to basically pen a letter of support. I'm sure MassMEDIC can help provide some data on that, but we really need to, at this point, start writing our representatives, and especially ones that are on ENC. Like you said, in Massachusetts, we need to get, make sure Lori Trahan hears from us, and the chairman should hear from us on this, and make sure that we're actually doing the advocacy on the ground.
I agree. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Because as Todd said, you never know what parts of it go, and when the opportunity to carve off a good a good helpful piece that can go on something else will come up. And as you said, once these more controversial or partisan things are behind us, we could be looking at a couple of opportunities, at least in the early part of the year, for like you said, Medufa and others. So Todd, thank you very much.
That's excellent.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thanks for the invitation. Really appreciate it, and thanks again to MassMEDIC for everything you do for your membership. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Todd. Anthony, thank you so much for the information. And just so you guys know, on the call, Anthony works directly with MassMEDIC. He's our contract lobbyist in Washington, D.C. He's terrific at his job. So if you do have questions, you can always funnel them up through us. Again, advocacy is a group effort. It's a team sport. We have to always advocate for sound policy. I think the really beauty of this session is that it does bring together, regulatory and advocacy. It's all part of the same bucket. And guys, thanks again for all you do for us, Anthony, and for the team at ML Strategies. Amazingly, guys,
it's my pleasure, Brian. And I'll just say before you sorry to interrupt you, but
no, go.
Running back to the house from the Hill for one of my very few recent in-person meetings with, and this was actually with our good friend Jake Auchincloss, and he sent his best, and we talked a lot about the medtech community and ways that's going to impact his district in particular, but what it means to the state and to the region. And I know we've done a lot of good work together and as a group to cultivate these champions in Congress, and these are the kind of bills where we call on them for we call in those favors and explain why we need them. MSIT's big. That's the kind of, this is the kind of thing that you spend all that time laying the groundwork for. So well done.
Yeah, I guess that's the takeaway, right? I mean, we if you loved MSIT, this is the bill for you. So I was just straightening up my sort of desktop, looking at all the draft comments we did on the MSIT repeal. So let's not let any of that work go to waste. We're going to be pushing hard on this as a association, but we need your help. So if you are a MassMEDIC member, get involved. If you're actually not a MassMEDIC member, you still should get involved and work with us on that. It's going to serve the whole industry in a great way. Anthony, thank you so much.
It's my pleasure as always.
Okay. So that brings us to the conclusion of our program. I want to just say in closing, every single speaker every single sort of presenter you heard from today is actually a MassMEDIC member. And I think it's a great representation of our community. Our community is filled with incredible minds doing really great work for not only their companies, but for the world. Healthcare, as we understand now, your health is your wealth, and your health is the most important thing that happens in this world. What a better thing to think about after 2 years of living under the cloud of COVID. But every time I hear from our members, I feel positive and I feel like there's hope. And I want to just in closing, thank our partners for this program, RAPS Boston chapter and the ASQ Medical Devices Division, New England Discussion Group. They're also great organizations that serve on the ground for this regulatory space. And of course, our terrific sponsors for this program and who have been with us all year, Veeva MedTech, RQM Plus, Duane Morris, and of course, ML Strategies and Anthony. On behalf of myself, on behalf of Rachel Robinson, our co-host for today, our incredible Vice President of MassMEDIC, I want to thank you for all your support over the calendar year. If you're not a member of MassMEDIC and want to become a member of MassMEDIC, please contact us. You can reach out to me at brian@massmedic.com, and we will happily tell you all about all the great things we're doing. Lots of incredible stuff to come. Next week, we have our final Women in MedTech program. This is going to be really exciting. I believe this is, I think, maybe our 90th virtual program we've run this year. It's hard to believe. Feels like, I can tell you, it feels like we did 80. So thank you so much for everything, and we will see you again very soon. Take care.